Jake, you're the first person on this podcast coming from Japan.
It is a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you, man.
It is a long way from Tokyo to Hoboken.
What are you doing in town?
So I've written 3 books. Tokyo Vice, The Last Yakuza. Tokyo Vice is the one that paid off my kids' college because it got turned into a TV series. The Last Yakuza and the sort of Tokyo Vice trilogy finale, Tokyo Noir, which just came out on October 1st. So I'm doing a sort of mini book tour, which is rare to do these days. I've got a gig at the Japan Society tomorrow night when we're going to do a lecture and a talk about the changing of organized crime in Japan over the last 20 years. So that should be fun.
The Japan Society?
The Japan Society. The Japan Society is like a bunch of people who are really into Japanese culture and customs, and it's kind of otaku, but also, the people who are into the karate and the Shogun and all that stuff. There's all kinds of people who have interest in Japan. As your Japan guy, I'm kind of limited in my area of expertise is basically organized crime.
The fun stuff.
Organized crime, esoteric Buddhism, and and is there anything else? Japanese politics, which is pretty boring for most people.
Japanese politics got pretty interesting after Abe took one to the head. That was wild.
When Abe got assassinated, my daughter was interning with me. We were working on this podcast called The Evaporated. I was in Hokkaido going to private detective school, and I was like, Benny, the prime minister or the ex-prime minister has been assassinated. I need you to grab my business cards, your business cards, and your friend and your best friend, and get on the Shinkansen in 20 minutes. You're going to the scene. And you're going to go talk to the cops, and they probably won't talk to you. And she was like, you mean like right now, Dad? Like now? I'm like, yes, now. 20 minutes. You have 20 minutes. If I call in 40 minutes, you're not on the train. You're fired. And I was like, I won't really fire you, but really, you go now.
So if she was there, the body wasn't even cold.
I think the body wasn't even cold because they were keeping him on life support, while they're trying to figure out what to do. I mean, he was dead.
Yeah.
I mean, he was dead on arrival. But they kept pumping blood into him for a while.
Brutal.
Do you know why he was assassinated?
Not really. And that's a huge oversight on my part because right when it happened, I knew a decent amount about Shinzo, but after he went down, I was like, wow, R.I.P., and then forgot about it.
Well, I mean, they asked me, I got asked by someone, this is unprecedented. Like no one would ever attempt to kill, a politician. And I was like, well, actually, the Yakuza killed the mayor of Nagasaki. And then in 2000, around 2000, a bunch of Yakuza who he screwed over threw Molotov cocktails at his office. So I was like, Abe has enemies.
Yeah.
But this case, he was killed by this guy named, I don't remember his first name.
Can we Google it, Alessi?
Yamagami. Yamagami-san.
Yamagami.
Yamagami-san was his parents got into the Unification Church, and they blew through all his money and ruined his life. And Abe had made this sort of backdoor deal with the Unification Church, like the cult from South Korea, to gain political support. And he decided that the only way to crush this organization was to point out the political ties between the Unification Church and Prime Minister Abe and the Liberal Democratic Party by assassinating Abe.
Wow.
And he sent a letter before he did it explaining exactly why he was doing it. And when the Japanese public realized that, wow, our ex-prime minister has been in bed with this Korean cult, and, there's not a lot of love between the right wing and the Koreans in Japan, it pretty much had the desired effect. I think it is, I'm not saying it was a good thing, but it was probably the most effective political assassination ever.
Wow.
Because the Unification Church lost their religious status. And Abe lost whatever respect the people had for him in Japan because these are just not people you want to get into bed with. And Yamagami-san, who hasn't gone on trial yet, has like a folk hero status among some people in Japan.
God.
Weirdest political assassination I've ever covered. I did cover the assassination of the mayor of Nagasaki briefly.
When was that?
I think that was like 2007.
Okay, so a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, he was assassinated because he was trying to keep the Yakuza, the Yamaguchi-gumi in particular, out of public works. And they were like, well, if they throw us out of public works and construction, that's bad for business everywhere.
Their bread money.
So we're going to have to make it a judicious example of someone. The Japanese mafia tends not to kill people because it's bad blood and they're supposed to be humanitarian organizations.
Yeah, they got a magazine.
Oh, yeah.
We were just looking at this.
You know, I have
before it looks so official.
I have 20 years of these like stacked up in my second home. Because if you're a reporter covering organized crime in Japan, you have to know who's who. You have to be able to recognize the names and faces.
Yeah.
And since they're, there's people on the cover. I mean, that's the head of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest organized crime group in Japan. He's still alive. I think at like 81, he's still running the organization.
Yeah, I can't show this page, Alessi, but it would get interesting.
Oh, is it the penis enlargement ad? Because there's always a penis enlargement ad. No, okay.
It was female oriented, but
yeah.
Either way, penis enlargements in Japan, they're going around these days.
I mean, well, that would be a whole other tangent, but there is a Yakuza boss who ended up getting sentenced to death because one of the people he tried to kill was the nurse who laughed at him while he was getting his penis enlargement procedure done.
No.
That would be Nomura from the Kudokai.
Wow. I see why he became a gangster.
Well, yeah, I mean, because literally the nurse said, I'm sort of making a pun here, but she said like, as he was wincing, like, look at you with all your, with all those tattoos that take hundreds of hours and are very painful, and you can't take a little prick.
I'm laughing, but she got killed for that.
She didn't. It was attempted murder.
Oh, it was attempted. All right, so she's still kicking. Nice job, lady.
Yeah, and this guy, Goto Tadamasa, who I'm not a fan of because he wants to put a contract out on me.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. He was once the largest shareholder of Japan Airlines, very wealthy, very powerful.
Is he chewing on a toothpick in that?
I think so, yeah. I once put up a photo of him eating yakisoba from a Yakuza video that was like a Succession video, and he really hated it. But,
yakisoba?
Which is like Japanese spaghetti.
All right, you're dealing with someone who went into a Chinese restaurant 4 years ago and ordered sushi. So I just want to warn you. All right,
it's okay.
I'm not the most cultured in that part of the world.
Whenever I go to France, they have yakitori fromage, which is like a yakitori chicken stick with like cheese on it, and you tell the French like, this is an abomination, and you would never have this in Japan. So it's okay that you order sushi at a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, I was with a couple of my Asian friends. They weren't too happy. I was like, where the f*** is the sushi? They're like, it's a Chinese restaurant. I go, I know. And they're like, yeah, it wasn't good. But anyway, what got you, a kid from Missouri, so into Japanese culture that you've now spent the last 35 years of your life living there? And again, we're going to get to all the good things you're covering, but like what makes you want to do that? What's up, guys? If you haven't already, please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And if you don't have time to watch this episode right now, I'd really appreciate it if you saved it to your watch later playlist on YouTube. Finally, if you'd like to follow me on Instagram or X, those links are in my description below.
Well, so the short version of this story is that in high school, it was like a punk rocker in a really preppy high school. You were either like a redneck or like a preppy. I mean, this is like the 1980s. So I got picked on a lot, and there was this one guy who really picked on me a lot. Well, we made peace, so I'm not going to say his name. Anyway, I decided that that the only way I could survive the rest of my high school was just to beat him up.
Oh,
but of course I was like, I'm not going to win in a fair fight, so. But I need to show that people should leave me alone. So we were in the middle of class one day, and as we were walking out, I kicked him in the balls, and when he leaned over, I grabbed his hair and smashed his face into the table, and probably broke his nose. He was bleeding from his nose, and I was like, okay, I'm probably be expelled. I mean, now I'd probably go to jail because
you did the old hair smash. That's some good. That's some Jersey shit right there.
Well, I mean, it works effectively, right? I mean, I sort of asked my father, who'd done like martial arts all his life, and he's like, hey, Dad, could you teach me a few moves? And I don't think he thought that I would really do it. So he's sort of sitting there with sort of bleeding a little bit, and the life sciences teacher, which was biology. I don't know why you call it life sciences. It's the 80s. Sort of took us aside, and he's like, he tells everybody to leave the classroom, and he's like, Jake, and Mr. H, I see that there's something has just happened, and I'm not really sure what happened. So there are two possibilities. One is that, Jack, you tripped and you need to go to the nurse's office. And the other is that Mr. Adelstein beat you up and you need to go to the nurse's office and he needs to be expelled. But if that's the case, then by the end of the day, everyone will know you got your ass kicked by the skinny Jew. So what will it be? And he said, I tripped. So off he went to the nurse's office.
What a gangster of a teacher.
And then, as I was sort of like going, yeah, like he was like, excuse me, Mr. Adelstein. We cannot solve our problems with anger and violence. I understand why you are upset, but that is not acceptable. I see you have some anger issues. And he says, and I would predict that he is going to come back and eventually try and return the favor. So what I'm going to suggest you do is that there's this good karate school that you should enroll in, and they'll teach you how to channel that anger and defend yourself.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, what if I don't? And he says, then you're going to be expelled. And I said, great, I'm taking karate.
Guys, it's about to be that time of year again where you're making those New Year's resolutions. Now, obviously, a lot of them we give up on by February. It's just the nature of the human beast. I know I've struggled with that in the past. I'm sure you have as well. However, if you could set up something automatically so that you don't have to think about it, and it was a good New Year's resolution, I feel like that's something you might be interested in. And that's why today you're going to hear me talk about my friends over at Acorns once again. You've heard me talk about this before. Acorns is a unique investment platform that allows you to invest either your spare change or whatever predetermined amount you want to invest every single day so that you can have a chance to grow your money. Now, I've been using Acorns since the very beginning of the pandemic. I really didn't have any money, if you know the story of this podcast and everything, but I put in just a little bit every day. And believe it or not, that really did grow into something over time that allowed me to invest into some of the equipment in this studio you're looking at right now. So it can make a difference. And that's why, once again, today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money has a chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. And like I was just saying with my own story a few seconds ago, you don't have to be rich either. You can start with $5 or even just your spare change. Also, it's so easy to set up an account. I did it inside of 5 minutes, and you can too. So head on over to acorns.com/Julian. That link is in the description below, or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. This is a paid client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, and SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/Julian. And that's how it starts.
That's how it started.
So when you went to do karate, because like this is something a lot of kids do and they don't end up moving to Japan, like what made you fall in love with the culture?
Well, my teacher, Mr. Foley, John Foley, had grown up in Okinawa, and he's sort of on the spiritual side of things. And I really enjoyed karate, and we would meditate before the sessions and afterwards. And I felt like, oh, this is very calming. Like this helps me feel like I'm in control because I did have anger issues.
This is the 80s?
This is the 80s.
Did he grow up there in the wrong years?
I don't know, man. I mean,
I
don't know when Foley grew up. No, he wasn't that old. He was like, maybe 20 years older than me, or 15 years older than me. Right. I think his father was in the military. And then, I started studying, like, okay, I like karate, and so I was studying the culture and the literature, and then I started reading about Buddhism because we were doing meditation, and I was like, it would be nice to go to study karate in the birthplace, which it's actually Okinawa, but going to school in Okinawa wasn't very feasible. So when I was at the University of Missouri, they had an exchange program. One day, I was literally walking across the campus on my way to McDonald's. I don't have very good healthy eating habits at the time. And this study in Japan flyer hit me in the face. So I had to make this monumental decision. Like, should I immediately go see about this program or should I get a Filet-O-Fish? And I was like, the Filet-O-Fish will always be there. Mm. So I went over and I talked to them about the program, and they told me I couldn't go because you had to have 2 years of Japanese under your belt to go. But it turned out, because Japan was in the middle of this, what they call the bubble economy, and was very expensive, that they had this exchange program with 20 Japanese students coming from Sophia University and no one going from the University of Missouri. Ah. And in probably the best negotiation in my life, I said, I'm certainly not an expert on Japanese culture, even though I have taken karate for many years. But I do know that if you have 20 people coming and no one going, that's not an exchange program. That's a fiasco. So you should let me go. and you should be glad that I am applying. And,
Gracing you with my presence.
and I said, I understand that you're saying that it's expensive. There must be a way that other people manage to survive there. And like, yeah, they teach English on the side. I said, great. I'll do the same thing. So let me go. And they gave me the application form, and I filled it out, and I was approved.
And now you never left.
I never left. So I was there a couple months, living in what we call a gaijin house, kind of like these low-rent housing for foreigners who have a hard time finding places to live in Japan even now.
Like a hostel kind of?
Kind of hostel, right? But Japan is very xenophobic. So if you're a foreigner, it's really hard to find a place that will rent to you. But there are these substrata kind of old places that will rent to foreigners because money is money.
Right.
I lived there for about a couple months, and then I ran into someone in the middle of the night on their bicycle. We struck up a conversation. He introduced me to this Zen Buddhist priest he was teaching English to. The Zen Buddhist priest Ryogen-san and I hit it off. And then after about 3 months, he was like, you're a student. You're clearly interested in Japanese culture. We have an empty room upstairs that's meant for monks, but no one wants to be a monk because it's a huge financial boom. So if you're welcome to stay there, the rent would be cheap. And, if you help out now and then, maybe you don't even have to pay rent at all. And I said, that's great. And it was a lovely arrangement. The only conditions were I had to go to Zazen, which is sitting meditation every Sunday. It started at 7 sharp, which means you had to be there at 6:30 and get to be ready.
What'd you have to do for that?
Well, you have to meditate for about like 90 minutes, and then afterwards you have green tea and cakes, and there's a little bit of a sermon, and then you talk to the neighbors. It was a great way to learn Japanese. However, because there's this kind of Pavlovian thing that happens, if you always have green tea and sweets after you've been sitting in zazen for, up to 90 minutes with some breaks, you get this sort of reaction is that my knees start to hurt whenever I have green tea. It's like the Pavlovian reaction. It's like I can't drink green tea without like this pain going up and down my knees. Anyway, so that was a really good experience. So I'm by this time I'd been there 2 years an exchange student because I extended a year. And Sophia University, which is called Jochi Daigaku there, is really respected. So I just transferred. And I was like, this Japan is such a weird, it is a weird country. I mean, if you come from the United States, it's such a different culture that's like, I'm staying.
Did people start to respect you though? Like you mentioned, it's like a little xenophobic towards people that aren't from there. Like, did they start to respect you as you were taking parts in the customs and really learning the language? And they're like, oh, he's cool.
Sure. In your own little community,
Yeah.
you can be accepted. And, people may forget that you're a foreigner and they don't remind you about it and they treat you like as good or bad as anybody else. I think that some people get disillusioned because they'd expect that to happen wherever you go. But, I mean, is there any country in the world where you can just walk into a neighborhood and people greet you? I mean, if you're from New Jersey and you've got a New Jersey accent and you move to Manhattan and you're talking in a New Jersey accent, you think everyone's going to treat you like,
it's
friendly.
close enough. We'll be all right. We'll be all right.
I mean, but are you fully accepted, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I mean, if you're a redneck and you go to Harvard, you think, there's still not sort of kind of like.
That's a good example. Yeah.
I mean, there is, so in Japan, if you learn the language and the customs, and also because, I mean, I'm living in a Zen Buddhist temple, so I have to behave myself. I have the same haircut now for like 30, 35 years.
Looks good.
So I look very clean cut, right?
Yeah.
No hipster beard. Was most of the time I was wearing a suit and tie because I was teaching English on the side, and you had to do that.
Oh, you had to wear a suit and tie.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was expected. I mean, if you ask me what has changed the most about Japan since I arrived there in like 1988, is it used to be just you saw a flood of Japanese men in like dark blue, navy blue suits and ties, and that was the norm.
And now they wear Tommy Bahama pineapples.
Yeah, well, true, because it's global warming. But actually, it is acceptable. I don't know if this is Tommy Bahama.
Well, I was giving you credit. If it was Tommy Bahama's legit.
It is rayon, so
It
quality material. Thank you.
It looks good. It's a good vibe for camera too. I feel like that'll be good for the thumbnail. So people will like that. They'll click that. So you get somewhat ingrained in the culture, and then after you finish university, you decide to stay there though.
So Japan is Japan has a kind of weird system for hiring people. Most people get their jobs before they graduate from college. So you sort of secretly have this job hunting season. There's an official job hunting season, and there's the unofficial job hunting season. And you go to these interviews with various corporations, and you hope that they offer you a job. And then if they do, then your last year of school, you're just killing time.
Right.
So in my case, I got a job offer from Sony Music Entertainment, which is our Sony Computer Music Entertainment. I forget what the name was. So I had like a year of school left. And I was like, okay, I am like everyone else in the world. I am lazy. And if I don't apply myself, I'm not going to have the level of Japanese that I want, because I feel like at the job I'm going to be doing for Sony, I'm going to be using English more than I'm using Japanese. So I was writing for the school newspaper in Japanese just to improve my Japanese. I feel very sorry for my editor, Inukai-san, who had to correct my terrible Japanese. But I mean, it did get better. And, they were all going like, yeah, we're going to, get a job as reporters. And I'm like, well, how do you do that? And they say, well, every newspaper has these newspaper examinations, like an SAT. It's kind of standardized, different depending upon where you're applying. And, if you prep for them and you do well, then you go on to the interviews. And if you do well in the interviews, then they offer you a job. And I was like, well, that sounds interesting to me. So I enrolled in a couple classes, like at the community center. I bought a couple textbooks, and I prepared for the examinations. And I took one for the Yomiuri Shimbun, which is this conservative newspaper, but it was at the time the largest newspaper in the world.
In the world?
In the world. 10 million readers a day.
Whoa.
That's, suck on that, New York Times. Now, the joke was there are 10 million copies published a day. There's not necessarily 10 million copies read a day, but there were 10 million copies printed a day. And went through that whole interview process. And it very much like is in the TV show. That's very realistic,
Your HBO show.
The HBO show.
Yeah.
And they offered me a job. And I was like, yeah. I'm thinking, like Sony's job is not interesting. This is interesting. And the first thing, and when they hired me, they said, okay, everybody starts on the police beat, and you are no exception. So we are going to send you to Saitama, which is just outside of Tokyo. It is sometimes called the New Jersey of Japan. No offense to New Jersey.
Yeah, what's the connotation here? I don't like that.
The connotation is that it's like, that if Tokyo is cool, that Saitama isn't so cool. It's on the outside of. I am not the one saying it. I'm just telling you.
It's like the Rhode Island.
Yeah. It's the Rhode Island
or Connecticut.
Okay. But there's a lot of crime there, and a lot of organized crime.
Connecticut. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they sent me there, and the first year we're on. I think people have this idea that like I was really into the Yakuza, like I'm fascinated in them, and that's kind of the TV show vibe. But no, I didn't know anything about them. It wasn't part of my life.
You didn't know anything about the Yakuza?
Didn't. I like what I would see in a newspaper article, right? I had a very surface understanding. Of course they exist, right? Of course you know that if you watch the news, they come up a lot.
For people who aren't familiar with them and haven't seen the stories on them over the years, can you just give a brief history of when they started and what they're all about?
So we'll work our way backwards because it's easier to understand.
Yep.
When you talk about the Yakuza, you're talking about 24 different groups located in Tokyo that have turf and territory all over Japan. They make their money through extortion, finance, fraud, drugs, and legitimate companies as well. They all claim to be humanitarian organizations. Because they are legal groups in Japan, you can look up the address of their headquarters on the National Police Agency webpage. And they were so legitimate that they used to have business cards, and until 2018, there was a monthly fan magazine. Now, there are weekly magazines that are kind of like sleazy tabloids that still have 5 or 6 pages of Yakuza news in them every week, but you don't have these glossy, giant 200-page. Yeah, this is full of information. Historically, they were two groups. They called them the Bakuto, which were federations of gamblers, and there were the Tekiya, which were federations of street merchants. So like wandering street peddlers and wandering gamblers, and they would set up little gambling, little casinos, kind of like in local communities, and people would pay them money, and sometimes they would pay them protection money. Then after the Second World War, they really, there was a period of time in Japan where the police were not empowered to arrest or deal with third-party nationals. Let me explain this easy. Japan was an imperial nightmare, so they colonized Korea, colonized Taiwan, colonized China. They brought a lot of those people over to Japan as slave labor, and then when the war ended, GHQ, the Americans were like, you can't arrest these people, you leave them alone for the time being. And so they were like, hey, Japan, payback time. So they started running the black markets. They started creating gangs. Police couldn't touch them. So these Yakuza who came back, especially in Tokyo and Kobe, sort of formed the sort of vigilante groups, and they sort of took back power. A year passed. The police were empowered to deal with the foreigners. And they stayed, running. And the police sort of like, okay, we owe you one.
Right.
And also the thing that they did was very smart. They went to these Korean gangs and Taiwanese gangs, and they said, you guys are good businessmen. Why don't you work with us? Why don't we work together? I mean, the police can come down on you like a load of bricks, but we recognize your power. It's a meritocracy. If you'll pledge your loyalty to the Oyabun, which is like the father figure, you're welcome. So there was lots of mergers and acquisitions.
Right.
Which is why actually these days 30% of the Yakuza are Korean Japanese. There's another 30% that belong to what were called the Burakumin. So Japan used to have an outcast class. Japan sort of had a caste system. And the people who worked in dealing with slaughtering animals or leather works or unclean jobs were considered untouchables. And, the Yakuza don't discriminate. So that also became a place where they were welcome. I mean, I think that's, pretty standard where all of the world, a lot of organized crime groups begin because you have a marginalized community, and they welcome them and let them, rise up according to their power.
Yeah, and they start out of some, like all crime, they start out of some sort of economic disadvantage.
Yeah.
Right? So you look at the Italian-American mafia here and the Jewish mob and the Irish mob, like they started because they were packed like sardines in these little neighborhoods right here, and everyone shunned them in America, and so they did this.
I have an uncle who was allegedly Meyer Lansky's right-hand man.
Who was your uncle?
We just don't talk about it in the family.
Well,
you can
we
look
talk
it up.
about it
No,
now.
we're not talking about it here.
Well, you can't just bring that up on the podcast.
I can.
That's like saying he was the right hand of like the god of organized crime.
Allegedly.
Like Meyer Lansky was allegedly ahead of the Jewish mob.
Allegedly head of the Jewish mob. People have said many things about my uncle. He's just a nice guy. That's all.
Okay. All right.
Okay. But
can we Google that? Jake Adelstein's uncle, Meyer Lansky. But keep going.
Okay. So the Yamaguchi Gumi, which is easiest to explain because it's the biggest. I mean, it's been the biggest for a long time. At one time, they had 40,000 members. That was founded in 1915. So it's been around for over 100 years. It started as a kind of labor union on the Kobe docks and then moved to extortion and protection, loan sharking. And then when the war ended, Taoku Kazuo, who is called the godfather of godfathers, was like, okay, we've kept the peace here. We have all these young people just out of, all these soldiers who are just back from the war. Let's go into business. Like, and he told his people, he told his members, we're going, of course we're going to run the black markets, and of course we're going to engage in illegal things and collect protection money, but it's also important for us to have a legitimate business. So the Yamaguchi Gumi is actually a corporation. They have this huge chunk of real estate in Kobe, and you can get the real estate deed for that property, and it's owned by a corporation with the members of the organized crime group on there as listed, and they are supposedly running parking lots and golf club management and other assorted activities.
Which they might actually be doing that.
But they might actually be doing.
But it's all the stuff behind it.
They ran one of Japan's largest talent agencies for many years, Kobe Genosha. In addition to that, they had construction companies and other companies. And the Korean group that they took over, the Yanagawa Gumi, in Osaka, set up not only construction companies and entertainment companies, they took a chunk from every single business in the area, including people who were like selling, meat skewers on the street.
They're going after everybody.
But everybody paid. And that was kind of their business model. I mean, it got so, and the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, which has been ruling Japan since the 50s, almost uninterrupted from maybe a period of 2009 to 2012, they were out of power. That was also funded by a Yakuza associate, Kodama Yoshio, and Abe's grandfather, who was a war criminal, Kishino Bosuke, who also was heavily in debt to the Yakuza. I mean, so when you have your leading political party founded by the Yakuza, you can see why they are sort of tolerated for many years.
Tied and tied.
Tied and tied.
Absolutely. So you get onto this beat now. Post-World War II, you're on this 50 years later, so they are very well entrenched.
So they're very well entrenched, but I started as a reporter in 1993. 1992 was the first time that Japan actually put anti-organized criminal laws on the books. They were called the Boryokudan Taisaku-ho.
What precipitated that? Like, what made them finally do it?
After the bubble economy had collapsed and the banks went to start collecting the bad debts and the Yakuza were heavily involved in that real estate boom, a couple bankers got killed, and the police were like, this is a bad optic.
Yeah.
Like the live and let live days, maybe not so good. And around this time, Itami Juzo, who's a really great film director, he makes really dark comic films, he made a movie called Minbo no Onna, which is the English title is The Gentle Japanese Art of Extortion. Oh. And it was a sort of how-to manual of how to deal with the Yakuza when they try and pilfer you and rob you and cheat you and make your life hard.
Just say no.
No, it was more like this. It was more like how to tape their conversations, how to use the law on your behalf to put them out of business. And then the message of the movie was if you fight against the Yakuza, you can win. And you shouldn't be paying them off. And
was that good advice?
Well, Godo Gumi, which was lampooned in the film.
Toothpick guy.
Toothpick guy.
Is that the one that put the hit on you?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So 5 of his guys, of course, on their own, right? No orders, right?
Yeah, they would never talk to him.
And because I'm sure because Godo always claimed
he's a legitimate businessman.
He's a legitimate business, and in his biography, he said, I never asked them to do it, but of course, I was glad they did it because he was an unpleasant man who made fun of us.
Right.
So they went to his house, and as he was coming out of his house, they grabbed him and they cut up his face very slowly so it would leave scars. And the message that they were trying to say was, guess what? If you try and resist us, it's not going to go so smoothly.
Let's put a smile on that face.
Oh, yeah. That's a very good impression. They weren't so creative with the carving, but so that made the police be like, okay, now we really have to clamp down on you guys. So when I started, they were beginning to enforce these very weak laws. My first year, I wasn't actually assigned to organized crime. I was sort of a general police reporter. But we were doing this bizarre case of a husband and wife serial killer, Sekine Gen and his wife Hiroko, who were running a very, a boutique pet shop that specialized in exotic pets.
Okay.
And they were selling pets for $50,000, rare breeds.
Like actual pets.
Yeah, like an Alaskan Malamute or an ocelot or some weird pet.
I thought this was more sinister, but go ahead.
But sometimes they would cheat their customers. And so when the customer would say, I'm going to go to the police, because you sold me a dog that can't produce offspring or whatever, they'd kill them.
Oh.
They'd kill them and they'd chop off the meat, which they'd probably fed to the animals, and then they'd burn the bones and they would disappear. So the Saitama police noticed that, around these two people, 10 people had disappeared over the last 10 years. And now there were 4 people missing. So they were launching an investigation. We knew that they were investigating. And my boss, Yamamoto-san, said, okay, Jake, everybody's getting assigned a victim. to do a profile of them and a background to gather information. So when the police bust this case open, we're ready to roll. And he's like, you are in charge of this Yakuza boss who was an associate of Sekine again named Endo and his driver Wakui who disappeared. So you need to find out everything about them. What was their last day on Earth like? Why would Sekine want them dead? That's your job. And so, I tried knocking on the door of the office because it's not hard to find the office but some very angry young Yakuza came and chased me out. Like there was a taxi park nearby, so I just hopped back in the taxi. It's very hard to run in a suit. Especially shiny shoes.
Yeah.
I started wearing sneakers after that most of the time.
There you go. Air Jordans?
No, whatever was available. You didn't get paid so well as a reporter. And I made friends with so there was, the homicide squad was investigating this, but they suck at dealing with Yakuza issues. So they had someone from the organized crime task force sent over. That was Sekiguchi Chiaki. This really hot, really great detective, really good at interrogating Yakuza. They sent him over to be part of the force. And
so are they just setting up outside the pet store every day?
No. They're like, they're trying to find some other separate, easier charge to arrest him on. Because this is like, Japanese police investigations, the homicide, are almost always begin with the arrest for something that is not homicide. Let me explain why that is. We're on a tangent, but might as well.
No, this is good. Okay. Go for it.
If you are arrested in Japan, you can be held for 23 days before you're indicted, and during which time you do not have access to your lawyer.
Oh, boy.
So if you want to get someone to confess to a crime or you want to browbeat them, you need something to grab them for, and a small criminal charge, even a traffic violation, minor fraud. The classic one is you arrest them first for improper disposal of a body. You interrogate them for 23 days. Then you get them to confess to the murder. Then you...
improper disposal? You talking about like if they were eating the dogs or something, or the humans they were killing?
Or like you left a body somewhere. Like you diced up a body. Like, okay.
But that would mean they killed them, right?
No. Doesn't necessarily mean they killed them. The initial charge is almost always shitaiki, which is throwing away a body, or improper disposal of a body, which is a crime. And they hold you for that 23 days, and they hope that you confess. Because Japan does have a 99% conviction rate.
Oh, that sounds very democratic.
Well, but the trick to that is the prosecutors drop 50% of almost every case they get. So they will only take a slam dunk case, even in murders. So if you don't confess, and then the prosecutor has to go like, oh my God, I might actually lose this case. Like I could be one of the 1%.
Right.
One of the 1% of losers, they may drop it. So they want that confession. They want that confession. They want the 23 days to get you to fess up. So then they rearrest you for murder this time, and then another 23 days go by.
So your boy was called in, or a guy was called in to be on this task force.
So he's like, you're going to talk to the Yakuza. You're going to find out what's happened to this guy, where he disappeared, why Sekine might have killed him. And so another reporter knew his address. So they gave me the address, and I went to the house many times trying to talk to him. Like, a lot of being a police reporter is, what is the term we used to use? Otoko geisha. It's like being a male geisha. Like you're trying to get in the good graces of these cops, hoping that they will leak you some kind of information so you will have a scoop, right?
There was a movie called like Memoirs of a Geisha. What was the concept there again? Like what's a geisha?
Geisha is just an entertainer that
Like
highly skilled in the arts. No, not a hooker. Most of the time, conversationalist, entertainer.
Got it.
Makes people feel good about themselves. Skilled in the Japanese arts.
Right. Okay. Now I get it.
So when they call you like a male geisha, right? You're chumming up with the cops. You're kind of bribing them with like the Yomiuri Shimbun owned a baseball team, so it's like, hey, would you like some tickets to the game this weekend? I just happen to have a couple on me.
Gotcha.
And I was making no headway, and then I showed up once in the summer, and I had brought some ice cream because his little girls kept coming to the door, even though his wife was lying to me and saying he wasn't home. And I was like, okay, look, I got this ice cream. It's going to melt. you guys eat it. And like I left it there, and then he came out. And he's like, okay, come in. Just come in. And I think this is also in the TV series. He didn't call me by my name at first. He just called me Yomi-san, like the name of my newspaper. People do that in Japan. They refer to you as like your job position and not your name.
Got it. Wow.
I mean, so I had like a boss above me, like I guess it would be like a junior executive or senior executive or something. We just called him like senior executive, right? It's pretty weird, but it'd be like, oh, senior executive.
Right.
And so he would call me as like Yomi-san, like sort of slang for my newspaper. But from him, as we were looking at this case and trying to figure out what happened to Endo, I mean, I spent so much time like looking into this guy's life and his friends and associates.
That's the Yakuza guy?
The Yakuza guy.
Got it.
He had a wife, of course, and he also had a mistress who's working at a hostess bar.
Nice.
I ended up dating his mistress. I think in the book, I didn't say it was the mistress directly because there were circumstances at the time the book was released that I was like, this could put her in a tough spot.
She went from a Yakuza boss to a reporter.
Well, I mean, he was clearly dead.
Yeah.
I did have this confrontation with someone in his organization who knocked on the door. Like we went while we were banging once, and he's like, "What are you doing? Like you're screwing, you're screwing like the boss's girl. We should kill you." I mean, he didn't say we'd kill you. He was very angry, and I was absolutely defiant. I was like, "Excuse me, like your boss, your underboss is dead. He's been killed by Sekine again. It's an absolute certainty. He's never coming back, and I am taking care of his woman. You should thank me."
Yeah, he had a 2-inch cock.
No, apparently he had a huge cock. That's what she said.
Oh, we're getting canceled for this one. It's okay.
We can't get canceled for it.
It's all right.
That was a fun and exciting relationship until I realized that she was dissolving meth in her lubricant to make the sex better. And I was like...
She was doing whoa.
Meth is a big deal in people working in the sex industry, right? And she would dissolve meth in her lubricant. So when we're having sex, because it's probably not the best way to ingest meth, but I imagine through vaginal tissues, it's pretty quickly absorbed.
That's a thing?
That's a thing.
Oh my God.
No, this is a disputed thing. People say, you're full of shit. I'm like, no, look it up, man. It's a real thing.
So she was putting meth in the lube.
Meth in the lube. I was getting like a contact high. And then when I saw her doing it once, like, what is that shit you're putting in the lube? And she explained what it was. And I was like, that is unacceptable. I was like, and I kind of did like a baby. It's, baby, it's me or the meth. And it's like, that's the meth.
She chose the meth.
She also was, had hooked up with another Yakuza boss who made a lot more money than I did. I mean, I don't think this was true love. But,
right. Yeah, I wasn't getting that sense.
But it was a relationship of convenience at the time.
So this guy had that mistress and the wife, and you were learning everything about him, apparently working overtime.
His mailbox became very overstuffed, and and sometimes mail would fall on the floor, and I would pick that up because once it's on the street, it's fair game.
It's fair game.
It's fair game.
Really?
Yeah.
That's legal.
It's legal.
In Japan, that's legal.
If it's on the street, it's anybody's property.
What kinds of things would you find?
I find like angry postcards from people and debts that he owed and letters like, dude, where are you? Kind of stuff.
Interesting.
Companies that he owned. Because he's successful Yakuza. He has like front companies, sometimes legitimate companies, sometimes not legitimate companies. Actually, it was nothing that was very useful.
And you're trying to figure out if dog store owner is
killed this guy, right?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I'm getting to know this weird cast of characters involved in this. And at one point, I figured out. My guess is that Endo figured out that Sekine had killed a couple of his customers and was blackmailing him. And that seemed to be the reason that he was killed. And meanwhile, as I'm trying to see what's happening with this investigation, Sekiguchi-san, who took a liking to me, and I mean, he was a very, very down-to-earth cop, sort of worked his way up to the top. I'd show up in my suit, and he and his like family would be in matching tracksuits, and like, we're going for a run, up in the hills. Come with us. And I'm like, okay. So he's like, okay, you're a reporter, and he started kind of teaching me the ropes of like, okay, here's how you talk to people, here's how you get people to confess, here's how organized crime works, here are the groups. He's like, you need to know the structure, like the 3 tiers.
How good's your Japanese at this point?
It's not bad. I mean, I was. Because the written language is such a nightmare. I mean, look at this.
Yeah, it's right to left reading. That throws me off.
Japan has 2 syllabaries, different from an alphabet, because the sound is the symbol, and then it has these kanji, which they took from Chinese, but they have Japanese readings and they have Chinese readings. So sometimes one kanji can be read many different ways depending upon what's before and after it. So I was, because as a newspaper reporter, you have to be able to read and write, of course. I was so focused on that, my listening and my speaking weren't very good. So it's a little bit like being sort of deaf mute, because the first year there would be a press conference, and I'd be like, I don't understand what's going on. I'm like, I need to stall until they give me the press release, and then I'll be sure that I'm doing the right thing. So it was a great education in the Yakuza and how the police and the Yakuza have this sort of adversarial but almost friendly relationship. So, the year goes by, the case breaks, Sekine is arrested. After the first year, most people are sent to like little mini offices to cover local news, to cover a wide variety of things. And Yamamoto-san, my boss, came to me and said, like, okay, you're moving to the police beat proper. You're going to be covering the prefectural police, and you're going to be covering Organized Crime Task Force 1 and 2, theft, and public security.
Are you thinking about like how dangerous, though, at this point? Because now you know about the Yakuza, how dangerous it could be to potentially...
Well, because I'm thinking, no, at this point, right, my interaction with them is like, okay, I got chased by them once, right? But I'm just talking to the cops. I'm not like, talking to these people. It wasn't until my second year, our like way into my first year, that I actually had a sit down with an actual Yakuza boss. And then I realized, like, okay, now we're getting a little more involved than most reporters do. I know reporters who've recovered the Organized Crime Task Force for years who would probably never sat down with a Yakuza in their entire lives. They just write what the police feed them.
But you could still end up dead doing that if you write the wrong thing that they don't like.
Well, the Japanese mafia, they're not like the Mexican mafia, so they're not going to kill a reporter. That brings on too much heat.
Really? Okay.
I mean, you really have to piss them off to do that. For that to do that, I've known 1 or 2 reporters who have managed to do that.
And you got a hit put on you.
Well, and I have had a couple dust ups. The worst was with this guy. I wrote it up in Tokyo Noir with one of my sources who was in the middle of a meth psychosis, and I said something that set him off. And it just turned into this nasty, uncivilized, undignified brawl.
Like American style or more karate?
No. That would be Kagu. It's like, oh, I'm, what's on the table? Here's an ashtray. I'm going to hit you in the head with the ashtray.
Oh wow. You went straight back to fucking high school again.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if I saw it coming, but I didn't see it coming. And
he hit you with an ashtray.
No, he just punched me first, and then I think we was on the floor, and he kicked me in the head, and then I'm like grabbing. I mean, I threw things at him.
And he's on meth. Wow.
And so, I think at some point I realized that if I kept hitting his knee, he would only have one leg, and then he would have limited mobility, and then I could hurt him enough that I could walk away, which is how it ended.
Wow.
But,
don't get into a dust up with this guy. Yeah. Shit.
No, I mean, it was. It sounds better than it was. We were both horribly injured, but I think But I was the one that left on my own 2 feet, so that's better, right?
There you go. Yeah.
But the ironic thing is that this is my source, right? I mean, this is a guy who's given me some great info and intel. And it's not like it's personal. It's like he's crazy because he's on so much meth that he thinks the world is out to get him.
That's right.
So, and if I turned him in, then not only have I betrayed a source.
You can't turn him in.
I can't turn him in.
You beat him too.
Yeah.
That's enough.
So we eventually made peace over that. I as the years go by and I get older, like Wolverine and Logan, I heal as quickly. I definitely avoid any possibility of a violent encounter with these guys. And I got one friend we went to college together, and I mean, his story is incredible. That will be a great show. But he's basically went to work for a really big Japanese company and got recruited by the Yakuza to run one of their front companies.
Oh, shit.
And they were kind of like, you're really smart. Like, we need you. Like, look at you. We can tell, when you go out with this drinking and stuff, you like the good life. You like the women and the cars. It's like, come work for us. Well, you're in a company.
And he knew what it was.
And he knew what it was. And he took it.
Wow.
He took it. And then the company went legit. Disney bought the company. I'm not making this up.
God.
Disney bought the company. So he's working for Disney. And, and his boss was like, more power to you. You go on. I'm proud of you. Good work. And, he gave me a card to let me get into Disneyland for free for a year. I was like, thanks, dude.
Courtesy of the Yakuza.
Well, I mean, he wasn't in the Yakuza anymore.
Right.
But somebody ratted him out. So he went back to the organization.
Oh, they ratted him out.
Yeah. Someone was like, yeah, this guy used to be in the Yakuza.
Whoa.
I mean, and, and
what a story.
I mean, he still kind of every now and then shows up in the newspaper in a really strange place. I'm like, dude, man, that's you, right? And he's like, oh, yeah.
Don't worry about it.
But we went out we had dinner at the Foreign Correspondents Club a couple months ago because my girlfriend Jessie was like, and Jessie's a tough woman. I mean, she's a black belt in Kyokushin karate, and she's like 180 centimeters, so she's like 6 feet tall, taller than me. I wouldn't tangle with her, but she's
she Japanese?
She's Japanese Brazilian.
Oh, what a combo!
Yeah,
whoa,
lovely combo. She's a lovely, wonderful woman and very strong. And she's like, "You're not having any Yakuza over to the house. Absolutely not. I don't care if you went to school with them, you're friends with them. It's like, do not bring that trouble here." And
I feel like she'll just beat the shit out of him.
Well, she might, but she's also like, you have avoided that stuff for like 3 years now. Stay out. I'm like, okay. So we had dinner, and he's like, it's like, man, my Oyabun, he's gonna be like the number 2. I could set up an interview with you, man, because his boss is rising in the organization. Yeah. And I was like, no, thank you. And he's like, what do you mean, no, thank you? And I was like, this is a big guy. Like, you'd have an exclusive interview with this big Yakuza boss. And I said, there's no plus for me in this. And I have interviewed a lot of Yakuza bosses. I have written a book about the history of the Yakuza where, it's interviews and the stories of Yakuza bosses of the last Yakuza. And I said, he's not going to tell me exactly how they really make the money, and he's not going to be straight up with me because he can't. And if anything goes wrong, or the higher-ups don't like it, then I got a world of aggravation and anger to deal with. There's no plus side. I've done it before. And I'm like, thank you. It's a generous offer, but I'm not interested. And then he was like, well, when are you going to have me over to the house, man, to meet your chick? And I'm like, I'm never having you over to the house. When you retire from the organization, which you should because you're like 56, dude, and, the future is not good. You were in prison for like 23 days. You're lucky they dropped the charges. When you leave, I'd love to have you over to the house. You have a fascinating story. We could write it up. But until then, I are, we're going to meet in public places if we meet at all, and not going to interview your boss, and not even writing about the Yakuza anymore unless it's something that's very public that everybody already knows.
Yeah. What year is this approximately?
This conversation we had?
Yeah, like the last year or so?
This year.
Yeah. All right, so very recently. So we had left off, though, when it was after the pet store owners got arrested and everything, and you got put on the beat basically covering this full time, not in the Connecticut of Japan, though, anymore, right?
No, still in the Connecticut of Japan.
Still in the Connecticut.
Still in the Connecticut of Japan. And my boss was like, and I was like, I kind of wanted to cover homicide or maybe white collar crimes, because those were kind of like, you made your career at the newspaper if you covered those areas and you had some scoops. And he was like, Adelstein, first of all, you suck at numbers. White collar crimes, out of the question. He's like, the homicide guys, xenophobic, don't like you. And he said, but organized crime members, 30% of them, they're gaijin like you. So you know them. And they'll get along with you.
Right.
And the cops, because you're an oddball, and the cops in the organized crime group, are almost imperceptible from the actual Yakuza that they deal with. They're weird, and you're weird. So it's a perfect match. You'll be like a fish in water. And he was right. I mean, it was such a good match. I did so well covering that section that even when I was sent to another office to cover like local politics and local affairs, I still covered the organized crime unit, which was unprecedented, to leave the police beat and still be in charge of one police division.
Whoa. And so how long were you on that?
I was on that for 4 years. Then they put me on prefectural politics.
What does that mean?
So prefecture is like a state. So I covered state politics. And guess what happened when I went to cover state politics? A corruption scandal involving the Yakuza. So what did I cover?
There you go.
Same thing.
Keeps coming back to
Keeps
it.
coming back. 99, I got transferred to the head office in Tokyo. They put me in charge of the 4th district, which is Kabukicho, the red light district, full of Yakuza. I did that for 2 years. I had some time as a features reporter doing various investigations. Then 2002 to 2005, back on the Metropolitan Police Department beat covering.
Basically.
But covering organized crime and vice.
So what do you mean by vice?
Vice isn't always run by organized crime. And Japan has very gray laws about
really?
The sex industry. I'll simplify it for you. In Japan, any sexual service other than vaginal penetration can be openly bought and sold. It's not a crime.
Yeah, I was looking in this magazine. It looks like it.
So that means anal sex, frottage, hand jobs, blow jobs, all that stuff is legal. The only thing that you cannot buy and sell is vaginal penetration. And because the anti-prostitution laws were actually designed to prevent women from being sold into sexual slavery or being trafficked, there's no punishment for the male customer or the female prostitute as long as she's not openly soliciting on the street. Mm-hmm. The only people that can be punished are the brothel owner or the pimp.
Whoa. Okay. So you're covering this for like 4 years.
Yeah.
And you're still covering Yakuza too.
But
this is another side of it.
I think vice and organized crime was two and a half years on the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. That was interesting because I also would cover for public security, which is kind of like, spies and that things as well. So when Nakamura-kun would be on vacation, I would have to cover like public security section. And when I would go to their press conferences, because I'm a foreigner, as soon as I walked in, everyone would like turn over everything on their desk, like, because like we could be a spy because it's not Japanese. It was so awkward.
Oh man. So you never really like get fully ingrained over there. There's still, you're always going to run into some form of a place where it's like you're a total outsider.
Yeah, but I would say that with the organized crime task force in Saitama, I mean, I got along with those guys.
Yeah.
So I got along with so well that like, I would be invited to farewell parties and stuff.
Oh, wow.
It was nice.
Yeah, good for you. Now, this has now been effectively well over a decade at this point of you being in Japan. Was there ever a thought during that time of like, oh, I'd like to come back to America or leave here? Or were you just going with the flow?
Well, I mean, got married. That didn't work out so well, but we had 2 lovely kids, and I realized at some point that they didn't speak any English.
Oh, none.
They barely spoke English because I'm never home. I mean, the Japanese work week for a reporter on the police beat, I was working 80, 90-hour weeks.
Oh, wow.
Honest to God, when I started, started a job that wasn't being a police reporter, and I was like, I'm not working for 80 hours a week. I was just like, nothing seems hard in comparison.
Yeah. That's crazy though that your kids didn't speak like any of it.
So we decided to go to law school. My parents were like, "We'd love to have you back, son. Help put you through law school." I had paid off a house in the United States.
What years was
2005.
Okay.
And I was having health issues because the work environment at the newspaper was tough. One of my colleagues had committed suicide. Also,
what happened there?
She was a really good reporter who was critical of the way we were handling coverage of the way we were covering mental health issues, like mental health people were a danger to society, based on one case. And she got demoted, and then they told her that she would never work again as a reporter, and she killed herself.
Oh my God, it's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, so it's. I mean, I am very happy. I'm very grateful to the Yomiuri Shimbun for giving me a job, but there were problems with that company. And another thing, as I could see, is that the National News Department had always sort of had a certain amount of independence because the newspaper is very, very right wing. I mean, it's the newspaper equivalent of Fox News. I mean, there's no doubt that we are on the side of the ruling party.
Yeah.
But I could also see that there was a huge clampdown on our ability to report independently. And honestly, if you've done 12 years at a newspaper and most of that has been on the police beat, it's just like the same story with different people.
Yeah.
I mean, it
wears on you.
Yeah, well, and it wears on you, and there's not that much to learn. I mean, maybe you get faster or write better, but it's not like, not a huge change. So I went back and I was applying to law school, and I got into a good law school, and then, as these things do at the same time, someone reached out to me from the U.S. State Department, and they were like, when you were a reporter, your reporting on human trafficking issues was great. Your contributions to the the annual Trafficking in Persons report were really appreciated, because I sort of did that on the side. I'd be like, okay, the Japanese government, and the National Police Agency is telling you this, but this is how it really works on the streets.
Oh, wow. Guys, if you're still watching this video and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please take 2 seconds and go hit it right now. Thank you.
And they said, we have funding for a major study of human trafficking in Japan, and we'd like you to head it up.
The State Department's
telling
you this.
And they said, but in order for this to work, we have to have some plausible deniability, because you and I both know what's the fastest way to get information about organized crime. And I'm like, I see what you're talking about. So, and they explained it to me, we're going to fund this project through a nonprofit organization. They're going to hire this firm in DC, which is going to hire you.
Whoa.
And I was like, you can find the report on online. Shared Hope International. Demand is the name of the report. And so I did that. Because I was like, they gave me the spiel. There will always be law school, but you have a chance to really follow up on the reporting work you've done. You have no restrictions on how you do it, and it could make a very positive impact in an area where you clearly feel is important and benefit many people. And I was like, and the money is great. I'm like, and I was like, I'm in. And while I was working on that story, and writing that report, around 2007, there was this police officer at the Kitazawa police station who was downloading porn onto his computer through a shared file service called Winnie. Kind of like Napster. Do you remember Napster?
I know it from the movie The Social Network.
Okay. So you share a file, you upload a file, and you download a file. So that was Japan's own homegrown Napster. So this cop, who's not a bad guy.
It was just regular porn.
Some tentacle porn, but I mean...
Tentacle? What is that?
Well, like people have squids and stuff on them.
What?
Look it up.
Is that only Japanese?
You know what? Look up tentacle porn.
Like anime? No?
But...
Like furry kind of stuff, but it's an
slimy
octopus?
kind of stuff.
Oh my God. They're taking the sushi a little too serious over there.
And some anime stuff, but some live action stuff as well. He didn't have very good taste in porn.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
But he accidentally uploads the entire organized crime database, or a huge chunk of it, on the Yamaguchi Gumi that the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department had. And in those files...
Where did he upload it?
Onto the network.
Oh my God.
He got fired.
Yeah. I'll say.
but and I'm not very good with computers, but I had covered hacking. So I called up this guy. I'm like, look, dude, I need you to download everything that's on that file server. He's like, done. So I have like 4 gigabytes of information about organized crime organizations, the front companies, their actual addresses, their phone numbers.
Oh my God.
And in there, Goto Tadamasa, who I was pretty sure had gotten liver transplant at UCLA because I'd heard the rumors.
This guy.
Yeah. His whole organization, everyone in his organization, including a list of his mistresses, and his passport numbers, and his family's passport numbers. They were all in that file.
And you're like, Doc City, bitch, let's go.
And I'm like, let's see how you got that liver transplant. And so I put it all together, and I put it all together, and then I put it all together, and I'm like, okay, I'm working on the first draft of Tokyo Vice. I turned it into this Japanese publisher, and I was like, listen, we are going to keep this part under wraps until the book comes out because this is really going to piss off some people. Yeah. And unfortunately for me, they had an English division which put a summary of the book on the web, which basically spelled out everything that I knew.
Oh, yeah. Not great.
And when that got out...
He's not happy.
He was not happy because, I mean, you know, Yakuza may not read English overall, but they have people who monitor everything.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Yamaguchi, I mean, it's a huge organization. I wrote an article once about this guy being sued for the death of a real estate broker that his men killed. This happens in Japan. You may not be able to arrest a Yakuza boss for murder, but you can sue him if his underlings kill your people.
So he can't get arrested, but you can sue him.
You can sue him.
Kind of like OJ, like he was let off.
Yeah, like
okay.
employer the term is employer liability.
Right.
And I wrote an article on it, and I explained in the article that, you know, suing Goto Tadamasa for the murder of this real estate broker, Nozaki, made sense, but suing his boss, Tsukasa Shinobu, this guy here, didn't make sense because at the time that these murders took place, he was in Nagoya in solitary confinement. And I was
the
like,
older guy.
The older guy, like the boss of the bosses. I'm like, you know, it's not really fair because obviously he can't give the orders or approve of it because he's in solitary.
Right.
So maybe technically, but really it's kind of a stretch. And I was like, you know, and compared to this guy.
Had to be the toothpick.
And compared to this guy, you know, toothpick guy, and Tsukasa Shinobu was a good Yakuza as Yakuza go. So... I mean, like, you know,
Vito Corleone.
I'm writing it for the Atlantic Wire, so it's a little bit tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
I think it was like the high price of killing someone as a Yakuza boss now. And then I also knew someone who was close to Goto, and I'm like, hey, you know, what is Goto saying about the lawsuit? And he's like, oh yeah, Goto's bitching that, you know, like the old man says he shouldn't have to pay anything. He got kicked out of the Yakuza. And Tsukasa Shinobu, his boss, when he went to jail, Goto put up $10 million for his bail, and he never got paid back. So he should just pay the family the damages from what he owes Goto. Leave him out of it.
Oh, whoa. So
I put this up on, you know, the Atlantic Wire. 6-7 hours go by. I get a call from someone at the top of the Yamaguchi-gumi, and they're basically like, we read your article, or like, we read a translation of your article. And they were like, thank you very much for pointing out that the big boss couldn't have been part of the hit and would never have condoned it.
And it must have been Goto. Whoa.
And I'm like, well, you know, it's just the truth. And he's like, this part where you have quote Goto saying like the old man should pay because he owes Goto his bail money, like, is that real? And I'm like, yeah, that's real. And I'm like, did you hear it from Goto himself? I'm like, no, I heard it from a reliable source. I'm like, who's the reliable source? And I'm like, I'm not telling you. And then this guy who I had a fairly cordial relationship with, he was like, can you translate that into Japanese and put it on your shitty blog?
Fuck you, shitty.
And I was like, well, he said kudaranai blog, and kudaranai means like shitty or not so good. And I was like, sure, absolutely. And so I did it. I called him up and I said, okay, it's on the blog. You know, I can send you the link. And he's like, no, why don't you print it out and we'll go pick it up? And I'm like, okay, because some of these guys are really analog.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
real old school.
And I'm like, you know, you can print that out anywhere. It's on the web. And they're like, things disappear from the web. Why don't you just print it out?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, okay, let me tell you my address. They're like, oh no, we know where you live. And I'm like, okay, there's like, I'm sort of under police protection, so could you be a little subtle? And I'm like, could you please not show up in like a Mercedes-Benz in front of the house because this would intimidate the neighbors?
So you were already under police
I was
protection.
under police protection.
Okay.
And they were like, sure, like where is there a place to park nearby? And I'm like, yeah, you just go down the hill.
Okay.
So I came up, and I gave him a copy to print out. And then he had like a little portable printer with him, and he printed it out again. I don't know why went through this rigmarole. He read it out loud to his boss, and he said, thank you very much. And then called his boss and put me on the phone with his boss, and the boss was kind of like, thank you for writing this. I understand that he has been a problem in your life, and we appreciate the article and the way you spell things out here, and we can assure you that he's probably not going to be a problem for you anymore. And I'm like, that's great, thank you very much. I don't need to know anymore. And shortly after that, he moved to Cambodia, and I had a discussion with the local police, and I said, I appreciate these years of police protection, but I think I'm ready to be on my own.
Wait, so how did you initially end up under police protection? Like what precipitated that at the beginning of this? It sounds like that was around like 07.
Oh, that was 2008. Basically after the contents of the books were released, I heard murmurings that the old man wasn't pleased. He sort of kind of figured out what was going on. And then I was told to come into the National Police Agency, and they said, it appears that there is a contract out on you, so to speak. I don't think they used the word contract. But they said, we're going to put you under police protection. Could you tell us exactly what's going on? And I said, well, you know what's going on. I was trying to write about him getting a liver transplant at UCLA. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, yes, the one that the FBI did under our nose. Yeah, we weren't very happy about that.
The FBI?
Yeah, sorry, spoiler alert for people who haven't read Tokyo Vice yet. Goto Tanamasa had a bad liver like many Yakuza because, they have bad livers because they get these tattoos that are hard on the body. A lot of them use drugs intravenously when they're young because they do meth. Your liver problems are pretty dynamic. He had a terrible liver. He was dying. And Japan doesn't do any transplants, organ transplants at all, especially around 2000. Really? No, because there's been this resistance to doing it.
Why resistance?
It's sort of superstition about body cleanliness, and you're not wanting to have your not making it easy for people to donate organs, or the fear that you would have trafficking in organs or other things. Japan's just resistant to change. But anyway, so he's dying, and he basically approached the U.S. Embassy, and he said, I know you have problems getting information on the Yakuza, and if you will get me into the United States and get me a visa, I will give you all the information about the Yakuza that you could want, or the major groups.
Goto's telling them this.
Yeah, Goto's telling them this through an emissary politically connected to the U.S. Embassy. And here's the deal. This is why this is attractive to the FBI. I understand why they made this deal, at least with him. The National Police Agency at the time would not share information on Yakuza bosses and their names or their dates of birth because of personal privacy issues.
Oh, that's rich.
But what this means is if you want to track the Yakuza in your country, it's not enough to just know their name because there's so many Japanese names that are similar. You have to know the kanji.
The what?
The kanji, the Japanese characters, the Chinese characters. You could write Goto Tadamasa like 7 different ways.
Oh, I understand now. Okay.
So it's because there's a lot of homonyms in Japanese. Mm-hmm. So you need to know the kanji, you need to know the date of birth. Ideally, you want a photo. Now, all that information is contained by the National Police Agency, but the FBI doesn't have it. So they can't track these guys coming in and out of the country, and they want to because they don't want the Yakuza operating businesses in their place. And it's been a point of contention between the U.S. and Japan for years at this point.
Wow.
So Goto's coming in and is like, look, I have everything already set up at UCLA. I need to get there because I have to get a liver transplant. All I need is a visa. I don't want to be stopped at the border. And there was another Yakuza boss named Takumi Masaru who had liver problems, and he was going to get a liver transplant in France, and he got turned away at the border.
Oh, shit.
So he knows that this can happen, and he knows he's blacklisted because he's an infamous Yakuza. So he makes that deal with the FBI, and he rats out a certain percentage of his people, but he only gives the FBI like a 20% of what they want before he crosses over. And once he gets his liver transplant, he fucks them over. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at the FBI, but once he gets his liver plants out, he disappears in the middle of the night back to Japan.
So he never gives them what they wanted.
No. So as Jim Stern, one of my favorite special agents, said, get the information first. That is informant 101. He said they should have dangled the fucking liver in front of him and says, you want this liver? Then you tell us everything now.
That's insane. The oversight right there.
Yeah.
I can't believe they let that happen.
So, but meanwhile, the National Police Agency was just always keeping track of this guy, right? They wrote a stunning report of how he operates and his connections, his methods, his modus operandi. What's like a 67-page report. I have it. When I was writing about this guy and researching him, it was in addition to the leaked files from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. I feel like I probably know this guy better than I know some of my own relatives.
Yeah.
Anyway, when he left, and went to the airport and he gets on a plane to the United States and he doesn't get stopped. They were like, what the hell is going on? And of course, because he made that deal. So I think when the National Police Agency called me and said, we're putting you under police protection, I think that they were also hoping, please write this up. And I remember...
Because you had that story.
And I had that story. I could not get it published in Japan. I had a Japanese weekly magazine that, I was sitting in a hotel room waiting for them to publish it. A little bit after midnight, the editor comes back and he says, I'm sorry, we're not running it. We've just pulped the first printing and we're taking your story out.
What? Why?
Because people were afraid of him. Because he was like a Balkan gangster. He killed people. Or he didn't kill them themselves,
Yeah, he'd hand it off.
Off. And everyone was afraid of him.
How did you initially find out about the FBI angle to it again?
When you looked at all the files that had been leaked and his passport numbers and when he traveled back and forth, there was one thing in there, and I can't go into details about that one thing other than the passport numbers because it would blow my source, who still is involved with federal law enforcement to some extent. I was like, okay, now I understand what's happened. The only way this could have happened is that the U.S. gave him permission to go.
Right.
And then I knew the person to talk to.
And then you hunted that down and figured out.
I hunted it down, wrote it up, waited to put it out in a book, and then I didn't think it would leak out, because I wouldn't say my publisher was stupid, but they weren't prudent. Sometimes you tell people something and you don't weigh the information so they don't realize that, you can't even hint that that's in the book.
Yeah. So you get the police protection when they put the English write-up of what to expect in the book up online.
And then someone, and I had friends in the police force because, I got along with these guys. And, they came in and they didn't give me many details. And we had a kind of a problem because they wanted to know exactly what was going on and what I knew. And I was kind of like, I can't tell you everything I know because I'll blow a source. So, so I'm sitting there having a cup of coffee, filling out some paperwork in the National Police Agency. This guy from Saitama, who occasionally people from the regional areas get transferred up to the National Police Agency, because the National Police Agency is kind of like the FBI, because they don't really have the power to arrest people. That would require a lot more explanation. So I see this guy, and he's like, "Hey, he's like, Jake-san, I heard what's going on," and he's like, "Listen, maybe you know this or maybe you don't, but let me explain this to you. The only reason this guy has a reason to want you dead is because he thinks he can stop the story. But once you get it out, then you're a secondary issue. As a matter of fact, then he doesn't want anything to happen to you because it's probably going to be connected back to him." He says, "You're a writer. You need to write." And he said, also, if you think you're going to, you can outrun this and go home, you just take the trouble back to your family. You need to stay here and solve this. Get it published somewhere, anywhere, somewhere credible. I said, then it's not your problem anymore. Then it's his problem. And so I tried the Japanese press, fail. Like I went, okay, clearly they don't have the balls to write this story up. And so Howard Rosenberg, who passed away recently, who was at 60 Minutes, knew my father from a story that he'd done years ago. And my father talked to Howard, and Howard's like, this is a fascinating story. I'll put you in touch with an editor to the Washington Post. So I wrote it up for the Washington Post. And as I was writing it for the Washington Post, someone from the LA Times got a scent of what the story was about. And I was like, okay, I'll keep the hospital name out of the Washington Post article in exchange, and so we'll write it up for the LA Times. And I want to be credited. And they're like, we can't credit you. We can mention you in the article. And I'm like, that's fine. So Washington Post article came out. I got a lot of calls from friends in the Japanese press who were like, is there going to be a follow-up? And I'm like, there might be. And they're like, well, it's a very sensitive issue. And I'm like, I can guess that. So you're not going to write about it.
There.
But then the LA Times wrote it up. And in two parts, including the fact that Godo had donated $100,000 to UCLA after getting his liver transplant.
Oh, very nice of him.
Very nice of him, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I knew this too. There were 3 other Yakuza who had gotten liver transplants at UCLA, and they'd all suddenly, within weeks of arriving there, managed to get to the top of the list because, they were livers that nobody else wanted.
That's right.
It wasn't like Americans were being thrown under the bus.
Never.
We were waiting for a liver.
No, we would never do that.
It's not like, money changed hands so these guys got to the top of the list, right?
Yeah, for money, we wouldn't do that. No.
Not in our nonprofit medical service, right?
That's right.
Right. And one, I think it was one wire service did an article. It went like this. According to an article in the Los Angeles Times, one of our most notorious gangsters made a deal with the FBI and got a liver transplant at UCLA, and so did these 3 other gangsters. And I was like, wow, I know the Japanese media can be gutless, but I never thought they would be that gutless. But that began the wheels of change that got him kicked out of the Yakuza. And once he was kicked out of the Yakuza, at some point, whatever offer there was to get me disappeared.
So he got kicked out.
Now,
how does that go down?
Goes down like this. The article comes out. He denies it. A couple months ago later, there's an article written about him going to having a lavish birthday party with celebrities instead of going to the monthly meeting of the Amagujigumi, which is a diss to the boss. Yeah, it is a diss. It is a diss.
Can't miss that.
It is possible that the person who wrote that article in Shukan Shincho might be someone I know very well, but that's always remained a mystery. So
not anymore, but okay.
But then a book came out about like the taboo stories of 2008, which had a detailed description of which Yakuza had gotten liver transplants and what Goto had offered up to get that liver transplant. And I was told that around October 14th, he was summoned to headquarters, and they told him, you have embarrassed the organization by, causing so much trouble to these celebrities. You've been insolent, and holding a copy of this book, which had all the details of his interactions with the FBI. The number 2 hit him on the head with the book and said, whether this is true or not, the fact that this is being written about you is a failure. You're out.
Oh, my God.
And they kicked him out.
But they didn't kill him.
They didn't kill him. He's too powerful to kill.
But they can. But he's not powerful enough to not get kicked out?
They had to they were worried. He had such a following and so much power and so much money.
I feel like it's the same thing.
No, they were like, the best thing to do is banish him.
So now he can be alive and plot his comeback with all his people.
Well, interestingly enough, after he got kicked out, there were a bunch of other bosses in the top 100 who sort of wrote a protest letter, and the response of the top management, was to kick all of them out.
Management.
Yeah. It's an executive structure. The management kicked out the other guys, and and it was such a revolution, sort of this chain reaction of him getting fired and these other big Yakuza bosses getting fired, that they called it the Goto shock. Like in Japan, the collapse of Lehman Brothers is referred to the Lehman shock, like the financial crisis. So in the Yakuza world, it's referred to as the Goto shock.
But they fire or get rid of all these people who are loyal to him. How does this not cause a gang war?
Because they were very, very organized. I think actually around a year later.
So those people just stopped their rackets and they're like, oh, okay.
The rackets got taken over. Some of them got a retirement payment. Some of them were suspended. They were allowed to take some funds with them, keep their houses and stuff.
Okay. All right.
I mean, the Yamaguchi-gumi, one of the things that has made this organization successful, there was a major split in the organization in the 90s between the Yamaguchi-gumi and the Ichiwakai. They split into two factions because basically there was a succession war of who should be the fourth generation leader. I know this sounds like inside baseball, but it's a split. It's a split. Yeah. Takenaka-san, who was the leader of the fourth generation leader, was assassinated coming out of his mistress's home. There was this huge period of sort of flux with no one in charge except the widow of the third generation leader. And as this gang war went on, the Yamaguchi-gumi decided that the best way to consolidate power and get people to come back was create a pension plan. So they created a pension plan.
A gangster pension plan.
Yeah. So if you, up until 2012, 2014, if you served out your time in the Yamaguchi-gumi, you got a pension when you left of anywhere between $200,000 to $500,000.
Oh, that's a nice fucking pension.
And one lump sum.
Oh, only once?
Yeah, only once.
All right, that's not that crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, if $500,000 can go a long way.
In Japan, maybe, right?
10 years ago.
Yeah, okay. All right. It's something.
So, so they're good at preserving the peace.
All right. So that just doesn't compute to me, though, just because, like, I'm still thinking of it in levels of, like, how they would work here. In the mob, they wouldn't be like, all right, you're going to Florida, Vinny. Well, be like, Vinny, let's get dinner, and he doesn't come back with his head.
If you kill him, you make him a martyr.
Yeah.
And you risk having the gang war that they don't want. Because then you have justification. So they let him live. I mean, he's not dumb. So, he's like, okay, what can I do to not get killed? So come around like 2010, very publicly, he announces, I'm going to become a Buddhist priest. And he invites all the press
Goto's going to become a Buddhist priest.
He becomes a Shingon Buddhist priest.
No, he didn't.
Different sect. Yes, he did. I interviewed his master, so to speak. So he becomes a Shingon Buddhist priest. He has a very, suddenly he's a Buddhist monk. Now you can't kill him, right? Even in Japan, when it's not very religious, it's a bad thing to kill a Buddhist monk.
Can't kill a monk.
And he's like, like now he's a good guy, right?
Did he shave his head and everything?
Yeah. He's forsaken his evil ways and that cheesy mustache.
Do we have a picture of this?
Look up.
Goto monk. Goto monk.
You have to probably look at Goto Tadamasa. Gototadamasa, and then monk. I don't know if it'll come up on the cover of his biography, which became a bestseller.
When was this?
Also published in 2010.
Oh, he didn't waste any time. Rebrand, baby.
So I talk about this in Tokyo Noir, which is the latest book. So he publishes a book, a tell-all autobiography around 2010, in which,
Oh my God, that's him. There he is. Bald Buddhist monk.
Yeah, that may be him.
Wow. Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure because I can't tell from here. But anyway, he becomes a monk, which sort of buys him. He's basically buying bulletproof vests, as in the forms of Buddhist robes.
Yeah.
He writes this tell-all book called Habakari Nagara, which is like Japanese for like pardon me, but fuck you. I mean, it's very polite Japanese. Habakari Nagara.
Not very monk of him.
It's on the surface level. It's very polite. And in the book, he basically makes a death threat to me because he refers to me in the same terms that he refers to the director that got sliced up, like the unpleasant director, the unpleasant reporter. I will not comment on what he wrote about me and my dealings with the FBI. But if I ever met him, he wouldn't be alive for very long, that kind of thing. Ha, 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 at the end. So this was a little disturbing to the police and me. So I hired my lawyer to not sue him, but to talk to the publisher and ask for a retraction and a correction. And since it was a very one-sided thing, I'm like, it defames my reputation to be referred to as, this unreliable bullshit reporter in his book. Where it's clearly, obviously me. And also the implied threat isn't great either. So I hired Igari Toshiro, who was an ex-prosecutor, to be my lawyer. He was on vacation. He came back to Narita Airport. He came back from the airport to meet with me, and then we signed a contract, and he was going to represent me. And then 3 weeks later, he was dead.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How?
They found him in the Philippines, cause of death unknown. There was a rumor circulated that he had committed suicide, but I got a hold of the Philippine police report, and there was no evidence of suicide.
Yeah, so did Epstein.
Yeah. And then that was very sad. Igari was a very interesting fellow. He made a lot of enemies. But I didn't have any legal representation for years after that. You can see why.
Oh yeah, because people don't want to have a part of that. Puts a target on them. Now, where are you though at this point? Where are you personally, like with your family and stuff?
Well,
aren't you worried about not just your safety but everyone's?
No, I think in 2012 when he got sued, the aftermath of that was
For the murder?
When he got sued for the murder, he paid $1.5 million to the family.
Godo did.
Yeah. Didn't admit to it. It's like, okay, my men did it. I'm terribly sorry. Here's $1.5 million.
And the cause of death is still unknown.
Well, the Nozaki was definitely murdered, not for the lawyer.
Oh, no doubt about it.
But when that was all settled and he moved to Cambodia, it takes a book to write that. Basically, I feel pretty secure in my life. He's gone with his life. I live on my life. You kind of wish that there was justice because this is clearly a guy that got away with murder. But,
a lot of times.
A lot of people get away with murder.
Sadly, you're right. Were there other people? Is there something else I want to come back to? But before we do, were there other major leaders along the way that maybe not on that level, but in light of your reporting, you got on your bad side? Maybe they didn't put a hit out on you, but they're like, yo, fuck this guy.
I didn't. I wrote an article about Saitama Shokin, which was a sort of Korean savings loan for in Saitama that went bankrupt. And after I wrote it, I got a bunch of death threats, which is one of the reasons they moved me out to Saitama, because I was writing about how they had been looted by one faction of the Yamaguchi, by the Inagawa Kai. So yeah, I had some bad about that, but I've been really careful otherwise. No one wants to make an enemy out of everyone. And what Sekiguchi-san taught me is really true. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, I've been very good about playing Yakuza politics. The last time I had a sort of tense situation with any organized crime group was about 2015. I obtained a photo of the vice chairman of Japan's Olympic Committee with the head of the Yamaguchi-gumi together, and the head and the vice chairman also with two other powerful Yakuza members.
Whoa. How'd you get that photo?
Through the enemy of the enemy principle.
Got it.
The photo had been circulating. It was sent to a couple magazines at the same time. I'm not sure who sent it out. I can think of many reasons. There was a reporter before me who tried to write it up, and they had their knees broken on the way home. So I knew that the photo existed. I got a copy of the photo, and I wanted to write it up. And I told my editor at Vice News at the time. By the way, Vice News still owes me $9,000. I would like that.
They owe a lot of people a lot of money.
I know.
That's wild.
I know.
So many of you got boned by them.
Yeah. Kai Henderson was a great editor, and I liked writing for Vice News. But I was like, okay, Kai, we're going to write this up. I have the photos. I've authenticated them. We have 3. I don't know what the connection is between the Yakuza boss and the vice chairman of the Olympic Committee, but it's bad optics. And especially with so much money in stake at the Olympics, they have easy access to information about contracts and things that would give them a competitive advantage. It's a good story. And I said, but the problem is, once I ask the university, he was also the president of the university, for a comment, then I'm in a world of, trouble, because I don't want my knees broken. So I have to have a promise from you that when I ask that we publish this within 24 hours, I'm going to hide out for 24 hours. And he's like, okay, done deal. So we did it. We had it ready to go. And about 3 or 4 hours before it went up, I called up the person in the Yamaguchi-gumi, in a senior position who I trusted. And I said, look, you know that there is this photo circulating of your boss with the vice chairman of the Olympic Committee, with Tanaka. And we are going to publish it. And I am not asking you for confirmation, and I'm not asking you for comment. But as a professional courtesy, I am telling you that it's coming out. So you're not caught, unawares. And that's the best I can do. And there was this kind of long silence. I mean, because maybe he felt a little bit like you, like you ungrateful son of a bitch, in a sense, I've been protecting you all this time. But I also made the case that, look, this is going to come out eventually. Wouldn't you rather have me write about it? Like, remember, I'm the guy that wrote about how you and your crew helped out after the natural disaster in 2011, and you're not always scum. Sometimes you actually do humanitarian work. I mean, because it's true, I did. I sort of I'm saying look, the
good side of the Yakuza.
The good side of the Yakuza. They have a good side. And so it's kind of this long pause, and he's like, okay, I get it. He's like, but could you do one thing? It's like, could you trim the photo so we don't see the missing finger? Because he's really sensitive about that. Oh my God. And I was like, look, I cannot touch the photos in any way. It goes exactly as I received them, because I don't want to be accused of of doctoring the photos. I'm like, I am terribly sorry. What I can say is that, your boss is one of the greatest, most honorable Yakuza leaders. I can throw in a line there.
You're going to throw in that he's honorable.
Yeah, and because I think he is fairly honorable as they go.
Define honorable as a Yakuza leader.
Hesitant to kill civilians.
Oh, civilians, not even gangsters.
I mean,
low bar.
Well, this is such a dark joke, but I do really like it. This was told to me by a police officer I like a lot. What crime is it when a Yakuza kills another Yakuza?
I don't know.
Destruction of property.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, but again, you're still talking about someone being referred to as honorable when the bar is not other Yakuza,
okay, so
it's civilians.
Here is the bar of honor.
It's like, thanks for letting Joe at Taco Bell live.
The honorable is that he doesn't allow the organization to sell and use drugs.
Banana of him. Yeah.
He doesn't allow theft. Doesn't allow robbery. Member commits sexual assault, they get kicked out. And generally not bothering of civilians, also part of the rule. So in the very low bar sense that he is strict about, here's the things you can't do in this organization, he was good about enforcing that.
Did you put a footnote at the bottom that said honorable means this?
No, I didn't put a footnote. I didn't put a footnote.
I would have done that.
If considering that space on the internet is sort of unlimited, I could have put a footnote in there.
Yeah,
like honorable defined by these low bar terms. Yeah. But I did. I think if you purse the article, there's a sort of faint amount of praise for him, even as I'm talking about.
What was this guy's name?
Tsukasa Shinobu. His real Shinobu. His real name is actually Kenichi Shinoda, but like Yakuza, I have kind of stage names.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. So his stage name, Tsukasa Shinobu, means to rule over and endure. Shinobu is like...
That's a badass name.
It is a badass name.
Yeah.
I mean, It's a lot better than... it's not a lot better. It is... it rings a little bit better than Shinoda Kenichi-san, which isn't particularly,
Yeah, I don't even know what the fuck you just said.
Yeah, that's just a name.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The first one I did. Okay, so you published this and that didn't get too much, but even though you showed his lack of a finger,
Yeah,
you were okay.
I was okay because I was courteous. I mean, there's this Japanese saying, what is it? "Shitashiki naka ni mo regi ari." Even amongst the closest of friends, there must be decorum. So, decorum and politeness and reciprocity gets you a long way with these people. I mean, they're businessmen in a sense, right? They've got a public image to maintain. You have a job to do. There's an understanding that sometimes we're going to be in a conflict. And I realized this is a dangerous article to write. There's already been somebody who's been severely injured for writing it. But after that one, I don't think I've written anything that has really, that I felt like, oh, I'm putting myself in danger. I'm putting anyone in danger.
Yeah.
Because, it's okay to do that a couple times, but I'm not stupid.
Yeah, I understand. You keep referring to the Japanese like cultural customs and philosophies, if you will. And I think a lot of us constantly hear about how culturally sensitive that country is and the people there are. Like there's a certain way of doing things. I remember like even in college, like when we'd study, I was in the business school, so we'd study like international business and stuff. They would talk about Japan and a couple other countries with all kinds of like very, to us, like why does that even matter type customs, but things that to them were extremely, extremely important. At what point though did you, was that something that at the very beginning you coming from America where we don't really have stuff like that, you fully accepted, or was there a real learning curve with like, oh, I gotta get with this?
I was really lucky to be living like in a Zen Buddhist temple where it's kind of like master-disciple relationship. And also had done karate, right? And it's very clear that there's a hierarchy there. There's a point in time when I just, like an epiphany, like, okay, you know what? In Japan, we're not equal. We're not even going to pretend that we're equal. There's a hierarchy here, and that is going to determine which honorific I use with you, whether I end my sentences in a polite tense, which words I use for you, me. There's many pronouns, different versions of them, depending upon who you're addressing. And I'm saying, that is just the way it is. You have to accept the Japanese worldview to speak the Japanese language. You could make it egalitarian if you want. It just doesn't sound natural.
Yeah. Yeah, so it changes. So I want to go back to the 2006, 2007, 2008 area when you got asked by the State Department to run this, the reporting on human trafficking in Japan. They obviously had seen a lot of your journalism on this, so you had done reporting on it, but what was the story with the human trafficking in Japan? Was it all like the actual Yakuza doing it, or was it this, international operation going on? What was the basis of it?
Well, it was complicated in the sense that you had huge networks. There was a group called Zengeiren. Zengeiren was like a lobbyist of Yakuza and exploiters that would bring in foreign labor, often working at sex clubs. But the Zengeiren was a powerful lobby, registered organization. They would have their annual meeting at the Liberal Democratic Party headquarters. Prime Minister Abe, when he was prime minister, gave one of the opening speeches to this group. So they were about ensuring the right that, that they could get these entertainment visas to bring women in and basically put them in sexual slavery. So that's a huge operation, right? With lots of members. That's very organized. You had, Goto had a company that was basically supposed to be an international cooperation friendship organization that was bringing in women and trafficking them. You had smaller operators that were recruiting people through job ads overseas, and girls would show up, they'd put them in an apartment, they'd take away their passport.
Oh wow!
And they would basically guard them 24 hours a day, and they'd sleep with a certain amount of customers, and they'd give them a subsistence living, all kinds. One of the things that the State Department really hated was because my job is to write the truth, right? So I was looking at one organization that was recruiting women and from Europe, and they were absolutely upfront with these girls. Like, you're going to come to Japan. You're going to be working in the sex industry. Your cover will be that you're going to Japanese school. You will have to go to Japanese school. You will have to do well at your classes. If you do not have your homework done, you don't go out for the evening. You will have an escort. If there's any trouble, you call the person. And you know, and they were treated absolutely well. I mean, like, you know, they knew what they were doing. If the customers got unruly, the guards came took care of them. They really made the girls go to Japanese school, and you know, a couple of them actually ended up like finishing their term and then getting jobs in Japan, is not in the sex industry. And I was like, and they were like, you know, you can't write this. You're saying that, you know, this is human trafficking. It's like, this isn't human trafficking because they're not being coerced.
Yeah, they're volunteering for it.
Not only they're not being coerced, they're being treated really well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know, your definition of human trafficking doesn't allow for women to work as sex workers of their own fruition. And if they're not exploited, I can't call that human trafficking. So we had some conflicts on issues like that. And then there was like a corrupt, the Nagoya immigration office was just completely, most of the upper staff had been paid off by the Yakuza. So they just turned up, it was like a revolving gate. You could bring in women from whatever country, clearly, you know, trafficked, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. Because human trafficking is, you know, everyone, I don't want to say likes the story. You know, the ideal is you have, you know, innocent, completely clueless woman who's, you know, brought into the country under false circumstances, passport's taken away, she's coerced, she's a sexual slave. It's absolutely nightmarish. That's easy to understand. But there are also things of like, you know, you're promised, you know, you're sort of lied to about what the job will constitute, and then you're not paid what you were offered. Is that trafficking? Do you have the ability to quit? Maybe yes, maybe no. And then you have cases, it's like, okay, yes, you know, they've agreed to come here. They're going to work as sex workers, but they're not paid, and they don't have freedom of movement. And they're basically blackmailed into working for nothing for their employers. That is human trafficking too. Because you know what you're getting into doesn't make it any less if you're basically enslaved.
Yeah. So you covered this for many, many years, and the State Department comes to you and says, through like the NGO or something, you're going to be hired and paid X amount so that you report your intel to us.
Yeah. So you report the intel through this group. Sometimes, you know, sometimes I interacted with them directly. And this is the Bush administration. And I don't have great things to say about the Bush administration.
Nobody
but they
does.
had a bee in their bonnet about human trafficking. Like, this is a terrible thing. I agreed with them. And so they took their findings and they basically went to the Japanese government and said, like, you either do something about this or we're going to rank you on the level of North Korea.
Whoa.
And you will be shamed. You will be shamed. Like, all the G7 nations will look at you like scumbags.
How bad was it relative to other G7 nations like Japan?
Japan was the worst because it didn't give a shit. And part of the reason they didn't give a shit is because, you know, you have so many people working legitimately in the sex industry in Japan because it's a legitimate industry, right? It's not illegal. So they don't understand that the difference between, say, a foreign woman and a Japanese woman is that the foreign woman, by nature of working in the sex industry, is already working illegally. So her employer can use that as leverage. Like, you know, you are an illegal worker. So if we turn you in or you go to the police, you get arrested, you get deported, you still owe us the money, and we know where your family is.
Mm.
So they didn't understand the coercive aspects of that because it just was kind of, because, you know, it's like, you know, kind of like, oh, you know, everybody who does this does it out of their own free will.
But when you're doing this reporting, you're still working as a journalist.
No, I wasn't.
It was full time.
No, I left the newspaper. I'd come back to Japan. I told people I was working as an insurance investigator, different business card.
Oh, wow.
Because this wasn't a report for the public. This was a report for the State Department and an organization.
But I'm almost surprised they didn't want you keeping your cover, seeing as they were also paying you through a third party, like trying to keep it under wraps.
Look, you know, and I told them, look, I can't do this as a journalist because I'm going to pay Yakuza for information. I'm going to pay him. I'm like, look, you know, this is like who is the scummiest of the scum? So you can go to a Yakuza guy and like, you know, hey, I hear there's this guy in your group who's like bringing in like young girls and, you know, basically putting them in sexual slavery. That just sounds so fucking sick. And they're like, you're right. That's fucking sick. That's not something we should be doing. And it's like, I would really like to know more about who's responsible in their organization, where they're headquartered, what are their front companies. Can you give me that information? And I would be very grateful and slip them, a wad of cash, and then they give you the information.
So you would do this often?
Not often, but a couple times. It's faster.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't do that as a reporter. I mean, maybe the reporters do it. I can't give money to criminals, but if I'm collecting intelligence, I can.
Gray area.
It's a gray area.
Yeah. So that type of thing though wouldn't be necessarily kosher with the U.S. government as your employer.
Well, I sure as hell didn't tell them, and I think that we had an understanding. I wouldn't tell them. One time I was told by my boss, like, turn in your receipts. There is no need to explain what they are for. And I was like, okay.
And you did this for like 2 years?
2 years. And
did you see success based on your reporting?
I did. Japan, first of all, the Zengai-ren dissolved. This sort of lobby of human traffickers dissolved. The Japanese police made some raids. They strengthened their laws. And there were definitely results. And I'm hearing this secondhand from the State Department is like, there was an understanding like, okay, you've got us. We look really bad. We will improve, and they did. The unintended and the sort of sad aspect of Japan clamping down on international human trafficking is you had a growth in domestic trafficking, and this is how the domestic trafficking angle works. This is a foreign concept probably to many people outside of Japan. In Japan, there are many clubs where you pay for hospitality. A hostess club is basically you're a wealthy Japanese man, or maybe not even so wealthy. You go in, you pay for a woman to pour you drinks and compliment you and talk to you for a couple hours. There is a version of that for women called host clubs. They're all over Kabukicho, where these, well-dressed, attractive, by Japanese women's standards, attractive men wine and dine you and dance with you and get you to buy them champagne and give you a good time for the night and sort of give you this boyfriend experience, and it's very expensive. And once they no longer had access to foreign women to exploit, what they would do is they would let these women, young girls, college students, hostesses, drink at these host clubs and, create a huge tab. So they're thousands of dollars in debt. And at first, then they would say, okay, you owe me so much money, like, hey, baby, if I don't pay this, they're going to break my legs. And they would introduce the girl to a sex parlor, and she would work off her debt.
Oh, like indentured servitude.
Indentured servitude. But then the police busted a couple of those people on human trafficking charges, right?
Yeah.
And it was like human trafficking, which you thought was only going to be used in international cases, like suddenly being used domestically. So then the host clubs and the people backing them got smarter. So the process began. The host introduces you to a loan shark. The loan shark loans you the money, and then he introduces you to a sex club. So there's like a degree of separation there.
So they got smart about how to do it.
They got smart about it.
I love how they didn't think that domestically they'd have a problem. They're like, oh no, human trafficking is just international. We're good. Yeah. Human trafficking is human trafficking.
Yes, it is.
Make people do things against their will that involves their body or their freedom or sanctity or where they're going to be. Like, I don't know why this is so hard.
Yeah, but like things, it takes a revolution in the cops are 90% male or 80% male, so it takes a sort of revolution in cop thinking to go like, okay, you know what, this is an exploitive enterprise.
Yeah.
One of the things that has been amusing to me is, okay, so Tokyo Vice came out in Japan. We had the cooperation of the Tokyo government, and part of the plot line in the season 1 is that basically you have one of the characters become a sort of indentured servant to a host club. And when the governor of Tokyo saw it, she was so horrified that she asked, like, does this really happen? And they're like, yes, it does.
Yeah.
And that prompted a crackdown on the host clubs.
Wow. So the show caused that.
The show, there was awareness and there had been stuff before, but when the governor of Tokyo is watching this and it's just not on her radar and she's like, does this stuff really happen? I'm like, oh yeah, it's been happening for years. She's like, well, that's not acceptable.
What made you stop working for the State Department?
complete burnout.
Mm.
It is depressing to see the worst of human beings. And it was a limited contract. And you know, once I turned in the report, I was like, I still worked with a nonprofit group called Polaris Project Japan, later called Lighthouse. So I still continued working with them, and I was a liaison for the police for a while. And I think the organization actually dissolved during the pandemic just because there wasn't enough manpower for it. But you know, contract ended, and also I felt by the time you get around to 2009, Japan was, hadn't stamped out international human trafficking, but it did a hell of a job.
Wow.
Got to give them credit where credit is due.
Turned it around.
Turned it around.
Big time. And how did this, so you go back, you get onto the beat with working the Yakuza cases Yakuza cases again, like we talked about. But how did this end up translating through as you're writing the books to getting to a TV show?
Well, I'll go through a little bit more transition there. At the same time, I was ending my study of the human trafficking thing, and also at the same time, the Japanese Yakuza had moved so much into the financial markets of Japan that the Japanese police in 2006 issued a white paper that said the Yakuza threatened the very economic foundations of the country. And there were listed companies that had been infiltrated by the Yakuza, including one company called Surga Corporation that had made $300 million in fiscal 2007 and was, and shares were owned by Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, like with foreign investors. But they had made that money by paying $100 million to the Yakuza to evict people from properties that they wanted to turn over.
Whoa.
And, around this time, I got approached by a couple investment banks that sensed that the Japanese government was going to come down hard on them and said, like, we basically need you to clear out our Rolodex. We need to know who we're investing in that is dark money. And up until the financial crisis, and after the financial crisis, I did that for like 2 or 3 years. So, and I wasn't doing journalism, so it's kind of like I'm completely out of journalism.
Yeah.
Like writing the human trafficking report, doing corporate due diligence. And I don't think I really went back to journalism in 2011 when there was the nuclear disaster. And
what happened there?
In 2011, Japan got hit by this tsunami and an earthquake. 100,000 people died. And in Fukushima, where Tokyo Electric Power Company had their nuclear power plant, 3 of the reactors melted down.
Whoa.
One of the worst nuclear accidents ever. And that was also, on a personal level, that was a really bizarre, horrible year. I did some reporting on the disaster, but my reporting on the disaster, the first thing I wrote for the Daily Beast was about how Yakuza were actually going to the damaged areas faster than the Red Cross, faster than the Japanese government, and delivering supplies and things to people who needed it there, which was true.
Yeah.
Because they have no overhead and they have no safety standards. They do what their boss tells them to do.
Venerable gangsters.
And if you're a humanitarian organization, if you're claiming to be one, then you have to do those things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, since I'm also doing this, corporate due diligence gig, I went to one of my clients and they were like, so, here's Tokyo Electric Power Company, has a monopoly on energy in the Kanto area. They've just had one of the worst nuclear reactor disasters in history. The question comes, is this company going to go under? Is the Japanese government going to nationalize them? Are they liable for damages, right? Is this unprecedented? Is this unforeseen? Could they have known this was happening? And I said, I would love to investigate this, but I want to write about it. Like, I want you to finance it. I will give you your report. But 2 months after it's out, or 3 months after it's out, I want to be able to write it up because it's an important story. Mm. And so I negotiated with my client, and they were like, okay, you give us the report. We'll use it to make some business decisions. 2 months later, whatever you've gained in that thing, you can write about it. So that was kind of my return to investigative journalism, powered by corporate money.
Through the back door.
Through the back door. Through the back
there
door. But it took a lot of money and time to do that investigative journalism. So I thought, well, this works out well for all of us.
Yeah, right back full circle.
Right back full circle.
And so that you do end up on like doing a lot of the Yakuza coverage again.
I did a lot of the Yakuza coverage, but then I really started to shift towards Japanese politics and covering corporate malfeasance and covering this nuclear disaster for years. It was very apparent that they knew they could have prevented it, and that they had also paid off the Yakuza in the Fukushima area not to write about the problems at the nuclear power plant.
Wait, they paid off the Yakuza not to write about it?
Yeah, the Fukushima nuclear power plant was riddled with problems because it's an old reactor. It was like over 30 years old.
And the gangsters are going to write about it?
Yeah, the gangsters, this is what gangsters do. Sometimes they publish magazines. They publish magazines.
That's right. I have one sitting right in front of me. Duh.
They publish magazines with scandalous information that can doom your business. And TEPCO's like, what can we get you to do to not write about that? I mean, the funniest conversation I've ever had the first time I ever had a real conversation with the Yakuza boss was Kaneko Naoya at the Sumiyoshikai. And so I started sitting in his office. He wanted me to do a favor for him. And I did the favor because...
You did the favor?
I did the favor, but I did the favor...
It didn't involve you getting on your knees, did
No, it didn't involve me getting on the knees.
Just making sure.
No, it wasn't that one of those favors. It was a favor that would save his ass and it required me talking to the cops and asking the questions. And the cops were like, please give him this information. Because the cops are kind of like, we want him alive. Like he's easy to work with. The person who's trying to, the person in his organization who's plotting to get rid of him, is an asshole.
Right.
But you can read Tokyo Vice. You want all the details. But so we're sitting in his office and he's explaining his whole business operations. Like, okay, we have this construction company. I have this political organization that shakes down people for donations. I mean, he's dead now, so it's not like I'm violating any trust.
You're just like felony.
And he's, he's like, like you walk through the red light district, everybody pays us a cut, just to stay in business. It's
Good business.
This is how we make our money. We're basically providing providing security for the area. We have information which we use to get lucrative contracts. We run legitimate businesses and we run illegitimate businesses. And he said, and he's like, and he sort of gave me the spiel. It's like, one of the reasons the Yakuza are tolerated in Japan is because there are things that we won't do. If you're engaged in common theft or robbery or, like purse snatching or breaking and entering someone's house or, sexual assault or selling and using drugs, you will get kicked out of the organization. And he said, everything else is fair game. And he said that includes extortion and blackmail. And I was like, well, why is blackmail okay? And he's like, well, if you're doing something so bad that the Yakuza can blackmail you for it, then that's social justice.
It's one way to look at it.
That's one way of looking at it.
Glass half full, if you will.
And he said, so I'd done him a favor. And he said, like, what can I do for you? Like, you have saved me from a very tight situation. And I said, well, I didn't do it because I like Yakuza. I did it because the cop that I trust told me that I should do it. And he said, well, I owe you. Like, what can I get you? What do you want? And he's like, pussy. And I'm like, no thanks. And he's kind of like, because he's running the red light district, right? And I'm like, yeah, no thanks. And he's like,
you sure?
And no, he's kind of looks at me. He's like, guys. And I'm like kind of thinking, I'm kind of like, I'm kind of like, am I giving off like, am I wearing a pink shirt?
I once fucked your boss's mistress, bitch.
Different Yakuza group. And I'm like, and he's like, and I'm like, look, I don't want money. I don't want pussy. I said, if you really want to give me something, I would like information. And I'm like, because information helps me do my job. I like to get a scoop. It helps me rise as a newspaper reporter.
He's like, that's so boring. Fuck.
No. And he was totally like,
I'm kidding.
No, he was like, he's like, I understand. He said, like, I will never give you information about our organization or that would disadvantage our organization because you understand how that is. But if I had information about a rival Yakuza group or political corruption or something that would be of interest to you, of course I will share it with you gladly. And I come across that kind of information all the time.
To this day.
Well, I mean, he passed away a long time.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Sorry.
He was the one that gave me the scoop about this savings and loan in Saitama being looted by another Yakuza group. I mean, that was the source. And he said to me something very interesting, which he said, you and I are in the same business. We are in the information business. You make your reputation and your money by finding out things that people don't want written and then publishing them. And I make my money by finding about things that people don't want written or don't want known and making sure you don't do your job for which I get paid. And I was like, wow, that's not really true.
But keep thinking that.
But I can see that we are both realize the power of information,
Yes.
especially in a society that is a shame society where people are embarrassed about the bad things that they do.
Yeah. So do you obviously, like, these sources you're getting, if that guy's a source on major stories like that, these are, you're still dealing with very high up criminals who may have, actually definitely have motives and stuff. Did that ever worry you about when you got fed a story? Like, okay, well, maybe they're giving me something that's true, but there's a false pretense for it, and we're missing the bigger picture.
My feeling always was about the question is the information true? It's not my business to know the motivation of these people. I do want to know because I don't want to be fed tainted information.
That's right.
But if the information is neither bad nor good, it's just information. Now, their motives for giving it to me are clearly self-serving. And that is why there's this very tricky negotiation you have whenever you deal with the Yakuza who gives you information, is you have to say this every time. It's like a mantra. Like, I want you to understand that I don't owe you for the information that you're giving me. You owe me because you wouldn't be giving me this information if there wasn't something in it for you. Either it offends either your sense of fairness is offended, or it's going to hurt your rival in the organization, or it's going to hurt the rival in another organization. I know you're not giving it out of the goodness of my heart. If you think that I owe you something for this, then I'm not writing it because I don't want to owe you anything. You owe me. Do we understand each other? And that always made things much easier.
Yeah, you're like, I could see how these guys like look at you because you're so matter of fact about things, and yet you're in these places you almost should feel out of place, but you're just so used to it. Like the way you come across, you're almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Not ambivalent, but like blissfully ignorant to maybe the power structure that you're around, because you're like, listen here, I'm just here to report. That's what I'm doing. However you can help me, great. If not, no problem. Have a great day. And they're almost like, damn, the ball's on this guy. It's my job is to tell people the things that other people don't want written, right? To serve the public, the right to know. Now, I have been fed stories that I have refused to write because when you think about it in a long shot, like Celebrity X is Celebrity X is a homosexual who is into younger boys, not like super young boys, but younger boys, and I'm like, that is interesting information. Take that to a gossip magazine. That's someone's personal privacy. I don't care. It's not your lane.
I don't care if they're famous. If they want to sleep with a young boy because they're closeted homosexual, I don't care. It's fine. Maybe that will feed some bottom feeder reporter, but I don't want to be the one to write it. Thanks. Interesting. Trivia.
So you pick your spots.
I pick my spots. Not just because it could be a story doesn't mean you have to write it. And we all pick our stories.
Yeah. Now, how did this end up translating into a TV show? Because, by the way, like, the show isn't on air anymore, but it was extremely respected show. Like, the critics loved it, the audience loved it. It was probably like a little bit niche for an American audience, but very fascinating.
I think it's still on HBO Max.
Yeah, it's still on there, but I'm saying
there's not going to be a third season.
New seasons.
Well, it translated like this. The book came out, people were interested. It went through the usual Hollywood development hell. At one point, it was going to be a movie with me being played by Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe.
Oh, he was going to play you.
Yeah, Dan's a really nice guy.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that.
He may seem like a nice guy, but he is a really nice guy. Yeah. He's exactly like he seems. And he studied Japanese. He was on board. The film looked like it was going good. And then one of the producers decided that we should have a Japanese partner. They told me who the Japanese partner was, and I said, do you understand that Tadamasa Goto, who is the villain of this piece, used to control the Japanese entertainment industry, like two of the most powerful agencies. And this firm that you're partnered with has a very strong relationship to another one of his front companies. And when they realize that you are going to make a film that is essentially about the people that used to rule them, who everyone fears, they are going to fuck you and leave you they're going to leave you at the altar and you will be fucked. And he was like, no, it'll be fine. These guys are really into it. They know they know what's going on. Like, it's an international Hollywood production. And I'm like, I strongly advise you find another partner. So almost literally the day they come to sign, for the financing to go through, they pull out. Whole thing falls apart.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay. And I got an apologetic call like, maybe I should have listened to you.
Yeah, you were right.
And I'm like, well, it's a little late now. So I forget about it. The person who had been working on the screenplays with me was J.T. Rodgers. We went to high school together. So he grew up to be a very great playwright, doing a lot of historical dramas, like set in Afghanistan or...
what's his name? J.T. Roberts?
J.T. Rodgers. J.T. Rodgers.
Can we pull that up, Elias? But go ahead.
So... so I'm just kind of, this is never going to happen. Like, it was a great fantasy. It's, at least some books got sold. There he is.
This guy right
here? Yeah. Him in the hat is really nice. I think that I actually wrote an article. So in 2017, he won a Tony Award.
Yeah.
A Tony Award for this play called Oslo. So he won, I think I wrote it up in the Daily Beast when he won. So he wins, and Oslo is this black comedy about the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks in Norway. Oh, you can turn this into a Tony awarding, the Oslo Accords. Oh, someone who actually knows what I'm talking about when I mention that.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm going to Oslo for an investigative journalism symposium next year. I've been invited, which is just wonderful. So I'll finally get to see Oslo.
Very cool.
Like, I've seen the play. Now I get to see
the place.
And so, I don't really understand the Hollywood dynamic very much because it's not my world. But apparently when you win like a Tony, you're sort of like royalty, like, oh, you have a Tony Award-winning play. What would you like to do, Mr. Rodgers?
Yeah.
And he's like, I would like to do Tokyo Vice as a TV series. And, by this time, because Ken Watanabe does a lot of stage acting, he sort of recruited Ken Watanabe, so Watanabe's on board. Then they're looking for an actor. Dylan O'Brien, I think, was one person they were considering. And then Ansel Elgort was like, I want to do this role. I will learn Japanese. I love the book. I would really like to be in this TV series, especially if Ken Watanabe is in it. And, and I was asked for my opinion, which doesn't happen very often with this TV show. And I was like, if Ansel really wants to do it and he's enthusiastic, then I think enthusiasm matters more than anything, really, because learning Japanese is a fucking nightmare. So
yeah, it's a hard language.
It's a hard language. It's one of the most difficult languages in the world. So
and he learned it.
Yeah. So
wow.
So JT and Ansel actually went and did the pitches together, like the two of them, off to Hollywood with Ansel in tow. And I don't know if that's standard for a TV series for the lead actor or the potential lead actor. And then at some point, they're like, John Lesher, who's one of the producers, was like, should we reach out to Michael Mann? Because I know him. And I'm like, yeah, that would be amazing.
That's a legend.
I'm like, Miami Vice. And I'm like, I totally stole the title of my book, Tokyo Vice from Miami Vice. But I was like, I was thinking, well, what is familiar to people? Tokyo Vice, an American reporter on the police beat in Japan, right? Everything you need to know about the book is in the title. The Australian title, by the way, is Tokyo Vice, a Western reporter on the police beat in Japan, because the Australians hate Americans.
Oh, they do?
They do.
Really?
Yeah. You don't want to put American reporter on there.
There's so many Australians that listen to this show. I'm shocked about that.
Well, I don't think we're very well liked. My publisher was like, can I change it to Western reporter? And I'm like, be my guest. Like, I can understand.
Wow. Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Not liking us down under.
They pretend to.
Okay.
I mean, if I could get away with being a Canadian, I would. But anyway, so all the pieces come together. They pitch it to HBO before it was Max, and they were like, "We love it. Let's do a season." And their plan was definitely to do 2 seasons, and possibly a 3rd season. And
did they film it in Japan?
We filmed it almost all in Japan.
That's great.
Except in season 2, where we go back to my hometown of Columbia, Missouri, was filmed in Canada because, of course. I was like,
production costs.
I was like, please film in Columbia, Missouri, so I can get a free ride home. And I was like, no, absolutely not.
No, but they did 2 seasons of this, and
it concludes.
And did it follow your life to a T, or did they take Hollywood liberties?
Oh, they took Hollywood liberties. Right. But what made it really great is that, I saw every script. So where it took Hollywood liberties, at least we kept it very realistic. And we would have, discussions, sometimes heated, sometimes not so heated, about not only just authenticity, but consistency, integrity of the character. There is a scene in season 2 where Ishida, who is modeled after a Yakuza boss I liked a lot, Kanazawa Nobuyuki.
You liked him a lot.
I did. I respected him. He used to be a professional baseball player, and he was a really honorable sports-like guy. Kanazawa, was as honorable as Yakuza get.
Fucking Shohei Ohtani over here.
Yeah. Ohtani as Yakuza boss.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe a little more savvy about how the world works than Ohtani.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Anyway,
there was a scene.
So there was a scene where, there's these gunmen break into the club, and the writers had him ducking under a table and trying to escape. And I was like, this is a Yakuza boss. This is a guy who runs this fearsome organization. We've spent, a season and a half showing who he is and his values, and you have him run under a fucking table? That is not acceptable. That is not what the character he's based on would do, and that is a betrayal of the audience. I don't care if it's a more interesting decision. No, absolutely not. He takes a stand. He's a man. Don't let him turn into a wimp all of a sudden. People will hate you. It's like jumping the shark. Absolutely not. And, and it's and it was kind of at one point, I was your job is not to, is historical accuracy and authenticity. And it's this isn't authentic. No Yakuza guy could rise to the top if he was a coward at the bottom. He has to be someone who takes the stand there. It doesn't work any other way. So it was rewritten.
Oh, so they went with it.
We went with it.
So that's cool.
So he takes a stand. He does not run. He does not shirk.
You defended your buddy.
He defends little Sato-kun.
There you go.
And then there was another thing so me and JT have sort of have this kind of Zen mondo, where
Zen mondo.
A mondo is the Zen master is master, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Then the master slaps him across the face. All right, all right, I have built an orphanage and rebuilt this burnt down forge. What is my merit, master? None. There is no merit. What if I burn down the temple now? Then there would be merit. And you're what is that? Back and forth. But it's just sort of a back and forth between two people. And whenever he would present whenever we would present, someone would bring up some crazy plot point. There was a point where they were seriously discussing have a Yakuza versus Russian mafia storyline. And I'm no.
That wouldn't happen?
No. There's never been a Russian mafia presence in Japan that is powerful enough to have a gang war. Never happened. Never existed. Certainly not in Tokyo. And JT would be is there a world in which, a small, cotillion of Russian gangsters? I'm no. There's not a world where that happens. Never. Not in this world. And not unless all the Japanese in this world are green and all the Russians have tails. Because that would be another dimension, but not in the Japan that we've set this story. So there was a scene where Katagiri, who's the detective, comes home. There's a Yakuza waiting for him, and he pulls out his gun. And I'm nope, stop. And I'm Japanese cops do not get to carry their weapons home.
What?
Japan has some of the strictest gun laws in the world. So when the cop goes into work, he can check out the gun, and when he leaves, he checks it back in.
Oh, that sucks.
Oh, no,
They get the job because they want the gun.
Yeah, well, you don't get to take the gun home.
That's fucked up.
And not only that, when you target practice, if there's one bullet missing, one shell missing, nobody goes home until they find that shell. Every shell, every gun is meticulously accounted for.
This sounds like Nazi Germany.
I disagree. This is why in 2021 or 2022, the number of gun deaths in Japan for a nation of 123 million people was one person.
Nah, that's a good number. That's solid.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like Yakuza's, they're packing.
No. The
Never?
Yakuza used to pack, like Tsukasa Shinobu, right? The big boss, the head of the Yamagachigumi.
They're not packing heat.
His bodyguard had a gun. He got arrested for like being an accomplice in possession of a firearm and went to jail for like 10 years.
So even what are they carrying nunchucks around?
Carrying knives, baseball bats, wooden swords.
Oh, they're good at baseball over there. They got Louisville. That's right.
Oh my God.
But still, no gun.
No gun. No one wants to have a gun. It is such a crime in Japan to use a gun. It's another crime to have a gun with a bullet that matches it.
Did the scriptwriters bin this one? Like they had to be carrying guns in that show.
I think we had one or two scenes where people had guns, but but this is 1999. In 1999, the police were kind of like, oh,
A little more lax.
they were. It was like, oh yeah, because remember the destruction of property thing? Oh, as long as you're just killing each other, we don't care.
That's how we do it here in America.
If a civilian gets in the mix, then we got a problem.
Whoa. So you basically had, even if it wasn't in your byline title for it, you ended up having a real say in how the scripting went to an extent.
Yeah, and we also had a sort of canary in the coal mine, and JT and I agreed to this. So Mari Yamamoto, who is a journalist who became an actor, who is currently starring in Monarch, this Apple TV series about Godzilla.
Okay.
And also had a really good part in Pachinko, the first season. So she is a journalist, started as a Japanese journalist, and then we worked together at the Daily Beast for a long time. And so in between acting gigs, she does journalism. And when we were doing Tokyo Vice, I was like, I want Mari in the writer's room as the interpreter, the consultant, someone that you can, go through these, because we have, materials that are only in Japanese, so that we can keep it authentic, from the ground go. So, she is one of the most uncredited reasons why Tokyo Vice season 1 and 2 are really good, and why it's authentic, and why even the Japanese media is like, yeah, this is real. Like, it feels right, because she's there going Russian mafia, no, geisha in the Yakuza office, no, cops, beating up a suspect, no, not going to happen.
Getting it right.
Yeah, getting it right.
Yeah. And then the latest book that you wrote, Tokyo Noir, this basically just picks up where your last one
it picks up where Tokyo Vice ends. So it overlaps a little bit. Picks up about 2007.
And what's the story being covered here?
The story is being covered is what it's like to be a corporate due diligence investigator in Japan, trying to ferret out how the Yakuza are doing business, whether you're looking at a real firm or a fake one. And then the second half is about discovering that there are worse things than the Yakuza, which are the ruling party and this horrible corporation that let a nuclear disaster happen and probably will have another one happen. I don't think people understand that the Fukushima nuclear reactor is still an accident in progress. If they stop pumping water into it, nuclear fission occurs again and you have explosions.
Why would they stop pumping water into it?
Well, they have to, but if the pumps break down, you have another nuclear accident.
Whoa.
They haven't even taken the nuclear rods out of it. And all the contaminated water that's flowing into it, now they're dumping into the ocean.
Into the ocean?
Yeah.
So this is still this is 13 years later.
Yeah.
And this is still basically going on.
I mean, the Japanese government calls it treated water. So there's a huge, controversy in Japan. Do you call this water coming out of the Fukushima nuclear power plant contaminated water or treated water? Because it goes through some filtering process. Japan is in the middle of what is called the Ring of Fire.
What does that mean?
It means that it's a center of volcanic activity, of seismic activity. You have volcanoes, you have earthquakes all the time. It is the worst place to build a nuclear reactor. And some of those reactors are 40 years old. And the through line of the government, and I talk about this in the book, is that the nuclear disaster happened because there was a tidal wave and knocked out the reactors and they couldn't cool them, and that's why we had a nuclear meltdown. But what actually happened is the reactors were so old that when the first earthquake hit, the first tremors hit, all the pipes burst. And when the pipes burst, you can't get coolant to the nuclear reactor. The meltdown began about 2 minutes after the first wave of seismic activity in reactor 1. The other 2 may have been knocked out by the power shortage, but one of the 3 reactors solely due to the earthquake. And when Japan redid their nuclear power regulatory agency and set up these safety standards, it's all predicated on the idea that it wasn't the earthquake that caused a meltdown. But that was because TEPCO hid the information and the data which showed the nuclear accident began with the earthquake.
They hid it.
And the reason it came out is the new president came in and in a huge data dump, one nuclear scientist was able to show within a minute of the first 9.0 magnitude wave heating, there was no coolant going into the reactor. Temperature shot up. The nuclear meltdown began. A nuclear radiation warning post about 20 minutes from the reactor went off before the first tidal wave hit.
What a mess.
Yeah.
I got to look at this story more.
Yeah. If any sensible nation would just be like, okay, we're going to abandon nuclear radiation, but there's so much money and there's so many politicians that have TEPCO stock that Japan will just keep continuing until there's the next nuclear disaster.
And their issue is because of the natural environmental problems that are around them. That's why this is an issue as opposed to the actual energy itself and stuff. Because there's a huge movement now around the world. Even Bill Gates is getting in on it to move to nuclear energy on things because it's climate efficient. But where it's located, in America here, they're doing it in fucking Montana and shit. Last I checked, Montana's not having typhoons and shit come through.
That is true.
You know what I mean?
You still have to dump the nuclear radiation somewhere, right? And the problem is, entropy. Everything falls apart. And nuclear power plants have best 40 years of usage. Best.
Why just 40?
Things start to fall apart. All these parts, the pipes, the coolants, the generators.
But they can't keep when things depreciate, you upgrade.
Everywhere you look in the world, after 50 years, you start seeing nuclear accidents. It's great until it goes wrong. I mean, the cost of your solar power or your windmill going wrong is maybe a couple birds die. The cost of a nuclear power plant melting down is that you have a huge area of land where no one can live for 10, 20 years.
Oh, yeah. It's monumental. The other thing that's going on a separate note, but I guess concerning trend in Japan that we hear about all the time, that I kind of wonder how much of this is noise versus truth. There has to be some truth there, but you hear about the demographics trend where people aren't having kids. And there's a potential for population collapse there. What's there to that?
Well, if you overwork your population and you don't give them time and enough money and wages so that they can raise a family, no one is going to have kids. 1 in 5. Half of all single mothers in Japan are in poverty. Japan has a gender equality ranking of 118 out of 144 countries.
Whoa.
So, if you don't make an environment hospitable for people having children, if you don't restore the sort of full lifetime employment that made people feel secure about having children, they're not going to do it. And the rich old men that run the country are completely clueless. So I just don't see. So
it's a real problem.
It's a real problem. I mean, you walk around. I mean, let's say I go to the gym, right? I'm like a kind of a gym rat because I don't have any other real hobbies. I should probably start a martial art again. It's full of old people. And like 1 in 5 people in Japan is a senior. People aren't having kids. And if you have a kid, the cost of education is so expensive. And if you want to get them into the right college, which ensures their career, that's in addition to whatever you have to pay for regular expenses. I think high school only became free in some prefectures quite recently.
Whoa.
No, it's expensive. People work insane hours. I mean, Japan is, one of the few countries that has a word for death by overwork, which is karoshi.
Really?
Yeah. Abe Shinzo, who I totally despise as a political leader, during his time in what they called the work freedom revolution or something, basically said that that you can work your employees 100 hours of overtime a month. Now, the Ministry of Health and Welfare sets 80 hours of overtime a month as the danger line, right, where people are at risk of dying from overwork. But, he made it so up to 100 hours.
That's a lot.
And then they eliminated overtime for a lot of positions as well. I think that Project 2025 has an idea of eliminating overtime. And I'm like, I always knew that Trump and Abe were friends, but I didn't know they were listening to each other.
Well, he says he doesn't know anything about that plan.
I guess not.
Yeah,
I guess he doesn't know anything about those 7 calls he made to Vladimir Putin either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like a lot of these things are used as taglines too, and I still haven't even looked at. I think I know the foundation that did Project 2025 or whatever, but people were just pounding that into the ground. Usually, when that's happening, it's noise rather than actual fact. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think the problem globally now with politics is these pendulum swings get wider and wider. So you don't really have equilibrium opinions anymore. There's either just we got to burn it all down from one side or the other.
Well, I'll tell you this because I'm 55, right? I remember the Cold War. And I never thought that I would see a day when that the president of the United States would be putting the lives of Americans at a lesser value than the lives of the dictator of Russia. When he's sending COVID tests to Russia while we don't have them in the United States, that's just mind-baffling to me. Being friends to Russia, kissing up to Putin, that would have been traitorism. That would have been the Republicans would have been so angry. And it just baffles me that we've reached a time where it's we're comfortable giving aid to Russia, which was always the enemy.
Somebody's always giving aid to somebody you don't like, though. You know what I mean?
True.
I'm with Putin's a bad guy, and that war is a really, really. I mean, all war is horrible. War is hell, but the world unfortunately is this place where alliances are formed. What'd you say earlier? The enemy of
the
my
enemy of my enemy is my friend.
And sometimes you see these parties, they get mixed up with people that they shouldn't get mixed up with, and we're always going to be able to pick that apart.
That's true.
You know what it is?
I am biased because my grandmother was a Ukrainian Jew, so you can tell which side I'm on.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's horrible what's going on there, but hopefully we see that stuff kind of clean up. But listen, this was a lot of fun to go through a new topic on the podcast. We'd never done this before. I never talked about the Yakuza with anyone. You've been wired into this forever. You're obviously wired into much more in Japan than just covering the Yakuza as well.
Final notes here. They are fading away. They have gone from 80,000 to 22,000 in the last 10 years.
Wow.
I have moved my collection of Yakuza fan magazines to my other house in the countryside because I need it less and less. The average age of the Yakuza is 55, which is my age.
Wow.
So, they are fading out.
They're fading.
And so keep a hold of this magazine because it's going to be an antique. This is your copy.
Because thank you. Because of your reporting, they're fading away. Even toothpick.
I really don't want to take credit for that, but they are fading away.
All right. Well, Jake, we'll have the links to the book in the description. People can also check out the 2 seasons of the show on HBO Max. And until the next book, my friend.
Okay. Thank you very
Alrighty.
much.
Thank
We'll
you,
do the
sir.
American thing.
Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. Before you leave, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. It's a huge help. And also, if you're over on Instagram, be sure to follow the show at Julian Dorey Podcast, or also on my personal page at Julian D. Dorey. Both links are in the description below. Finally, if you'd like to catch up on our latest episodes, use the Julian Dorey Podcast playlist link in the description below. Thank you.